My name is Darcy. I currently live in a single-family home with my husband Carlos and our daughter Nikki. Carlos and I met back in college, and we instantly clicked. I was in the design department, and he was studying law. We happened to be in the same club. After graduating, I took a job at a design firm and was doing what I loved. Carlos and I dated for a few years and got married in our early 20s. I continued to work during my early pregnancy, but once Nikki was born, I decided to focus on raising her. Carlos and others encouraged me to prioritize parenting, so now I work from home. By the way, Carlos passed the bar exam after college and is now working as a lawyer. Mommy! I'm going to play with my friends. Be back before it gets dark. Okay. Life's pretty amazing, living with a loving husband and an adorable daughter while doing the design work I love. Then, one day, something unexpected happened. I was out shopping a bit far from home when I saw my mother-in-law, Christine, struggling with some heavy bags. I couldn't help but approach her. Mother-in-law! Oh, Darcy, what a coincidence! Christine smiled warmly at me. Since it had been a while, I felt happy to see her and suggested, "How about some tea?" "I'd love to, but I'm in a hurry." "Oh, I see. My apologies." "It's fine. Let's catch up over tea next time." "Then let me at least help you get these bags home. They look really heavy." After some convincing, I loaded her bags into the back seat of my car. They were pretty heavy, and carrying two of them seemed like a task. Christine said, "I'm sorry, and thank you," with a smile, so I felt reassured that being a bit assertive was okay. Plus, there was something I had been wanting to talk to her about. We chatted about this and that as I drove her home. It takes about 3 hours and 30 minutes to drive to our in-laws' place, so we can't visit frequently. However, we do make it a point to visit for New Year celebrations, so I know the way. Weren't you struggling carrying all this by yourself? I decided to ask about something that had been bothering me on the way. In one of the bags my mother-in-law was carrying, there were groceries. In the other, there were daily necessities and cosmetics. Items clearly geared toward a younger demographic rather than what she'd typically use. "Well, they're essentials. I ended up buying a lot." Her expression seemed a bit down. I didn't pry any further and drove us to her home. "Darcy, thank you so much. You've been a huge help. This is far enough. I can take the bags to the entrance." "Oh, you don't have to." When my mother-in-law opened the door, I placed the bags at the entrance. Just then, I heard a harsh voice. "Finally, you're back. What took so long, mother-in-law?" The voice belonged to my sister-in-law, Caddy. She seemed surprised to see me, and her words trailed off. I was equally surprised to see Caddy and found myself frozen in place. My mother-in-law looked flustered as she assessed the situation. "Sister-in-law, long time no see. How have you been?" Fine. It's been a while for you too, Caddy." Saying that, I return a smile to Caddy. I hold back a sigh as I look at her. She clearly looks like she's just woken up. She's holding her mobile phone in one hand. Her incomplete sentence alone was enough to raise suspicions. "I'm sorry for the sudden visit. I happened to see mother-in-law while I was shopping nearby. She looked like she was struggling with the bags, so I came along." I see. I just got back from work this morning. I'm a mess, sorry. Thank you for helping mother-in-law. I'll take it from here." Caddy quickly grabbed the bags and took them inside. In a soft voice, I asked mother-in-law, "Is everything all right living with Caddy and the family?" Mother-in-law simply smiled and nodded. "Thanks for your concern, Darcy. I'm fine. Sorry, I can't even offer you tea. No worries. It was nice to catch up. I'll visit again. Without pressing mother-in-law further, I left. Still, I couldn't simply ignore the situation I'd just witnessed. Originally, mother-in-law was supposed to live with us, but after my father-in-law passed away over a decade ago, my brother-in-law Brett said, "We'll live in the family home and take care of Mom." Even Carlos, my husband, was initially concerned. I felt uneasy about the situation, so I initiated a discussion, but it didn't go well. Carlos is busy with work, right? And he has irregular days off. I work close by, and Caddy's parents live nearby too. But still. Don't worry. I was a troublemaker back in the day, and I haven't done much for Mom, you know? I want to repay her. All right. Given what was said, Carlos couldn't really argue. In the end, with my mother-in-law's consent, my brother-in-law and his wife moved into her house. Today, I shared what happened with Carlos. Really? That's concerning. I'm not sure, but it makes me a little worried. Let's give Brett a call. After hearing my concerns, Carlos decided to call Brett. Hello? Carlos, what's up? Hey, it's been a while. Just checking in on you. I'm doing fine. After exchanging pleasantries, Carlos began to move the conversation forward. Calls usually led to discussions about how great things were between him and Caddy, and this was no exception. Good to hear you're doing well. Yep. We're taking an extended vacation next week. What about Mom? Is she coming? Oh, Mom said we should go just the two of us. Carlos and I exchanged looks. Given my mother-in-law's personality, this was no surprise. But we did notice Brett hesitating for a moment. In that case, let's have Mom stay with us during that time. What? At Carlos's words, Brett raised a surprised voice, and I looked up. Carlos, who smiled at me, nodded slightly and continued. We haven't seen Mom in a while, and I think Nikki will be thrilled. I'll get in touch with Mom. So, it's settled. Hey, wait! Carlos cut off the call before Brett could finish. Carlos exhaled deeply and looked at me with a serious face. We had stumbled upon an opportunity to discuss my mother-in-law. Following that, Carlos promptly arranged the dates with Brett. I coordinated with my mother-in-law, and she agreed to stay with us for about a week. Granny's coming today? Yes, isn't it exciting? Yeah. Nikki loves Granny. Nikki was ecstatic that her grandmother would be staying over. A few days later, my mother-in-law arrived at our home with minimal luggage. As soon as she entered, she looked relieved and bowed her head. I'm sorry for intruding for a whole week. Don't worry about it, you're more than welcome. Nikki has been looking forward to this, so please make yourself at home. And so, we spent a week together with my mother-in-law. However, I felt uneasy about my mother-in-law's actions from day one. Before her arrival, I cleaned up the home office I usually use for work to make space for her. When I showed her the room, she immediately said, "Oh, you've prepared such a room for me. I feel bad. I'd be okay just with a corner." No worries. Please, feel free to use the room. I only use it for work anyway. I convinced her to use it, but she still seemed apologetic. Also, with the kids off school today, I was planning to make lunch for the three of us when she said, "Let me cook." Can I use the fridge? She kept insisting on doing household chores even though I wanted her to relax. Gratefully, I managed to get her to unwind in the living room by having Nikki play with Granny. Additionally, she would say things like, "Oh, don't go to the trouble of snacks for me." I'm not worth it, or I'm fine with whatever's left over. Cold food is enough for me, as if she's an outsider rather than family. She used to be much more vibrant. It was painful to see her belittling herself like this. When Carlos came home while Nikki and mother-in-law were chatting, I filled him in on how she was acting. I see. Thanks for letting me know. I wish she would value herself more. Let's keep an eye on her. It's only the first day. Right. And just when it was getting late and we were about to go to sleep, my mother-in-law said, I guess I'll borrow this spot for a bit. Carlos and I were at a loss for words at her action. She was trying to lie down and sleep on the basement floor. Mom. Carlos was speechless. I said as calmly as possible, Mother-in-law, please consider this your room until you leave. Use a comforter so you don't catch a cold. But won't that be a bother? Absolutely not. We want you to be comfortable and enjoy your stay here. I looked her straight in the eye, trying to convey my sincerity. From her behavior, it was obvious what kind of life she's had with her own family. When I smiled warmly, mother-in-law's eyes filled with tears and she finally broke down. It's been 10 years since I've slept in such a warm place. Thank you. What? My mind reeled from what I'd just heard. Carlos's voice was several octaves lower, filled with disbelief. Hey Mom, tell us the truth. Are you getting along with Brett and the others? How's life been? Mother-in-law chuckled awkwardly before speaking. Well, getting along might be stretching it. But I have to make do, right? I mean, if they ditched me, I wouldn't know how to fend for myself at this age. Slowly, mother-in-law began to share the grim reality of her life with us. Turns out, it was much worse than we could have ever imagined. She was handling all the housework in that home. Whenever Caddy was a little unhappy, she would raise her voice at her. All the shopping responsibilities were left to mother-in-law. She would buy whatever they needed. Moreover, mother-in-law was shouldering most of the living expenses. Clearly, her son-in-law and his wife had ulterior motives when suggesting they move in together, mainly to exploit mother-in-law's finances. Mother-in-law would only eat after the two of them were done, usually in the basement. The basement didn't even have heating, so she was freezing during the winter months. It's been a long time since I've had a meal like today's. I was always alone, you know. What? Are you serious? The reason mother-in-law wanted to sleep in the basement was that it had become the norm for her at her previous home. Both Carlos and I were at a loss for words. Initially, when Brett and Caddy moved in, they were kind to her. At first, mother-in-law was happy and thought it was a good idea to live with them. However, as the years went by, their behavior changed drastically. Initially, Caddy used to cook, and Brett would help with other chores. I'm so tired. Brett, you work so hard. Let me take care of things today. You should rest. Really? Thanks, Mom. That was probably the beginning. Mother-in-law, I'm really tired today. Oh, sorry, Caddy. I have plans with the neighbors today. What? You're prioritizing them over me? Oh, I apologize, that's selfish of me. No, that's not it. Don't worry, I'll prepare dinner when I get back. This is my room, and this is Brett's room. Slowly but surely, they began to change how they treated mother-in-law, manipulating her more and more. Eventually, she found herself taking on almost all of the housework, and contributing financially as well. Initially, she was using what used to be father-in-law's study as her room. It was a well-equipped space with a bed and other furnishings. She was delighted to be able to use such a cherished space as her own room. Even the study wasn't safe from Caddy's reach. One day, Caddy suggested, "Let's renovate this old study." "Hold on, Caddy. This is my husband's cherished study. Can we please leave it as is?" "I'm just thinking of your well-being, mother-in-law. Why do you have to make me look like the bad guy?" "I'm sorry, but I like it the way it is." "Really? This room is outdated. It looks worthless." With that, Caddy reached for a piece of glasswork. That was a music box made of glass, a favorite of my late father-in-law. He bought it during a trip they took together. It was something he treasured. But Caddy deliberately dropped it. "Oops, my bad. That wasn't on purpose." Oh. Wow, the glass is shattered everywhere. It's so dangerous. What a waste to keep this room the same, especially with all this junk. "Please, Dee, don't touch anything else." "Who do you think you're talking to?" "Fine, I'll leave the study alone, but from now on, you take care of everything in the house. And with all this junk, it's too dangerous for you to sleep here. You should sleep in the basement." "What? Any complaints?" In the end, mother-in-law agreed and had to sleep in the basement. I felt like passing out, hearing all these shocking stories. At the same time, I was angry with myself for not noticing sooner. "I'm sorry, Mom. How could I not have realized?" "Don't blame yourself. I was hiding it, too. Isn't it pathetic?" The reason we never noticed was also because of a scheme by brother-in-law and his wife. Mother-in-law was only given a room when relatives gathered at her house. But the room was empty, no bed, no furniture. And if she dared to speak up, they threatened to demolish her study. They were only nice to her when people were around. We didn't notice because of that. If mother-in-law and I hadn't crossed paths that day, this might have continued even longer. The thought sends shivers down my spine. I always wanted to discuss this with you. But that study and that house are full of memories with my husband. Tears flowed freely from mother-in-law, and I couldn't stop my own. Our precious mother-in-law had endured this life for over a decade. I can't even imagine how tough it's been for her. Why would her own family do this? They're not human. I shouted and hugged mother-in-law tightly. Darcy, I'm sorry. I need to step out for a bit. After we had cried together, Carlos gently rubbed my back and spoke softly. Don't worry, Darcy and Mom. I'll handle this. Please take care of Mom, Darcy. I nodded quietly. Got it. Leave mother-in-law to me. Carlos. I hugged our concerned-looking mother-in-law again, stroking her back to comfort her. Then I turned to Carlos and said firmly, Go teach those awful people a lesson. Of course. Carlos chuckled and nodded, then left the house. Later, Carlos called to say he wouldn't be back until tomorrow evening. I shared the news with mother-in-law, and we all drank warm milk, trying to lighten the mood with some good stories. Nikki, who had heard the commotion and looked worried, joined us. I wanted to override at least some of the bad memories. Usually, I'd remind Nikki not to stay up late, but since tomorrow was a day off, the three of us enjoyed chatting till we were content. All right, that's enough for today. Mother-in-law, would you like to go shopping with us tomorrow? Huh? We can buy whatever you want and eat delicious food. There's a cute dessert place that Nikki loves. Why don't we enjoy a relaxed day, just the three of us? At my words, mother-in-law's eyes filled with tears again. She nodded slowly, repeating thank you, over and over. That night, we spread an air mattress in the living room and slept closely together, with mother-in-law in the middle. The next morning, mother-in-law greeted us with the same smile she often showed when father-in-law was alive. Good morning. And just as promised, we all had a fun shopping day. In the evening, we got a message from Carlos saying he had returned home, so we headed back as well. Before entering the house, I had one more thing to say to mother-in-law. Mother-in-law, we are on your side. Whatever is hurting you, just let it out here. We will always be by your side. And me too. I'm on Granny's side as well. Mother-in-law nodded silently to our words. Welcome home. Sorry for leaving the house to you. We're back. Everything okay? Yeah, no issues here. Carlos greeted us with a warm smile. I had Nikki and mother-in-law wait in my home office. Walking into the living room, my eyes widened at the sight of my brother-in-law and his wife sitting on the floor. Their hands, resting on their knees, were trembling slightly. Upon seeing me, they greeted me in a soft voice, their faces filled with apprehension. What happened? My inner voice showed plainly on my face, which I turned to Carlos. Still smiling, he said, I haven't done anything yet. His use of yet made even me tense up, expecting something dramatic to happen. So, to cut to the chase, starting today, Mom will be living with us, Carlos continued. I felt relieved at those words. Carlos continued to speak to me as I nodded. So, Brett, do you fully grasp what you've put Mom through? And you too, Caddy. Do you understand what you've done to someone else's mother in their own home? I can't say it's entirely your fault, we didn't notice it either, but you have to take responsibility for your actions. After all, you're supposed to be mature adults. Carlos spoke vehemently. It was the first time I'd ever seen the usually gentle and calm Carlos so angry. I honestly dislike bringing up work matters at home, but this time, I'm speaking as Ms. Christine's attorney, not as family. His voice was friendly but low and icy. My brother-in-law and his wife meekly responded, yes. And after several hours of discussion, numerous decisions were made. First, my brother-in-law and his wife would no longer be living with us. They would have to return all the money they had been extracting from mother-in-law, plus pay additional compensation. Having decided to respect mother-in-law's emotional attachment to her study and her own home, brother-in-law and his wife moved out. We banned them from ever setting foot in mother-in-law's home again. Upon hearing the decision, mother-in-law gave a troubled smile. So, we are family, right? Asking for damages is a bit much, don't you think? No, this is a gesture from our son Brett to Ms. Christine, right? Carlos's words left Brett nodding so fervently he looked like he might lose his head. Yes, yes. I'm truly sorry for everything. Please accept this as our sentiment. Brett seemed so diminished that you'd wonder what on earth had happened. After the conversation, Carlos took a deep breath and turned to mother-in-law. So, please accept this, Mom. Let's put an end to this. Brett and his wife will never forget what they've done and make sure it doesn't happen again. Both of them nodded in silence. Seeing this, Carlos smiled gently and continued in a low voice. Well, it will never happen again, right? Yes, yes, yes. Never again. Absolutely. And so the conversation ended. Within a few months, we had received the damages that Carlos had arranged from the brother-in-law and his wife. Mother-in-law wanted to give it to us, saying it was because we had helped her, but we refused. She insisted, so we agreed to accept a little each month for groceries, and let mother-in-law use the rest. Carlos, what did you say to Brett and his wife? I was curious about that day, so I asked him when we were alone. Carlos scratched his head even though it wasn't itchy. Don't lose faith in me, okay? Why would I? You helped mother-in-law and made them regret their actions. Actually, Carlos had contacted Brett immediately after hearing what had happened. It's strange for me to say, but I rarely get angry. But when I do, people say I'm scary. I think I really scared him when I called. He told me where he was right away. Although a bit distant, he drove straight to the destination. Upon arriving, he immediately questioned the two. I couldn't let it go. Especially because he's my brother, and I had trusted him with Mom. I didn't know the details, but considering how scared they both looked, Carlos must have been terrifying when angry. On their way out, they bowed deeply, saying, "We're really sorry." Well, mother-in-law seems happy, and so does Nikki. I'm happy too. Thank you for standing up for us, Carlos. Darcy, I'll continue to do my best for our family. Even after everything, it's good to know we can still be a happy family. I'm grateful for my dependable husband and for mother-in-law, who chose to rely on us. From now on, I intend to make up for the hardships by being a dutiful daughter-in-law and doing my best in every way. When I looked at the sender's name on the letter delivered to my mailbox, it was written Violet. Violet! I blurted out without thinking. I hurried back to the living room. Why now? Why did I receive a letter from Violet? There's no use just thinking about it. I carefully opened the letter. There were several writing papers in it. Taking out only the writing paper, I continued reading while imagining a Violet's face. To Mom. It described the circumstances that had led Violet to her current situation. And at the end, these words were written. Please take revenge on my husband Andrew for me. That's my last request. Violet. As I finished reading, a single tear fell onto the table. Feeling a sense of powerless anger, I clenched the letter in my hand. At the same time, I resolved to take revenge in place of Violet. Andrew, you were only pretending to be a good person. It's my fault for not realizing it. So, I'll commend you for deceiving me until now. But that ends here. You made a fatal mistake. For taking away my dear daughter, I'll make you regret it until the end of your life. I bit my lip and reached for my mobile phone. My name is Scarlett. I work as an insurance agent at a major insurance company. After losing my husband early, I worked hard for my daughter Violet. It was often difficult, but thinking of Violet somehow gave me the strength to keep going. Then, about half a year ago, Violet told me she was getting married. Violet's at that age now. Violet had just turned 24. Now that I am 53 years old, I was feeling my age more and more. But there's no time for rest. Marriage is expensive, after all. Violet's wedding is next month. No time to rest. I wanted to help her for the wedding expenses and prepare a celebration. Maybe soon, I would have grandchildren. It was hard, but also incredibly joyful. But misfortunes come in times of happiness. That day, the phone call I received was just the thing. Violets. The caller was a police officer. With a slightly strained voice, he informed me that Violet had passed away. Stunned, I let my mobile phone slip from my grasp. Her wedding was coming soon, why did Violet? Those thoughts raced through my mind. About a week later, I received an unexpected letter from Violet. I didn't know how Violet had died until I read this letter. Violet's letter began with a meeting her future husband, Andrew. I heard that Violet and Andrew met at the confectionery shop where she worked. Indeed, Violet loved making sweets. Probably because her best friend's family owned a confectionery shop. She got interested after enjoying their delicious treats and started making her own. Putting that aside, Violet went to a local culinary school after high school to study confectionery formally. She seriously learned confectionery skills there, and she got a job at a confectionery chain with several stores in the state. Nice to meet you. I'm Andrew, I'll train you. I've got a bit more experience, but feel free to talk to me. Andrew, a bit older, became Violet's supervisor when she started her job. Turns out, Andrew was the son of the president of the confectionery company that owned the shop where Violet worked. Incidentally, whenever Violet was scolded by other pastry chefs, Andrew quickly defended her. She's new, there's no need to be so harsh. Of course, everyone knew Andrew was the president's son. So, when he said something like that, no one could oppose him. On the other hand, Violet found Andrew, who defended her, to be very reliable. Soon, a trust developed between them, and it was only a matter of time before it turned into romantic feelings. Eventually, about a year after she started working, Andrew confessed his feelings to Violet. That's how they started dating and gradually deepened their relationship. But Violet wasn't just focused on romance. She diligently worked as a pastry chef. During work, she followed the instructions of Andrew and her superiors, and after hours, she practiced to improve her skills. Sometimes Andrew would join her for practice. It seemed those moments were important in strengthening their bond. By the time they started dating, Violet had become a competent pastry chef. But all of this was part of Andrew's scheme. Violet only realized this after they started dating. Time passed, and a few months ago, Andrew approached Violet with a proposal. Violet, a sweets exhibition will be held in 3 months, right? I need to discuss something about that. The sweets exhibition? The one at the department store downtown? I heard popular confectionaries will be selling their treats there. Yes, that one. Apparently, there's been a vacancy, and suddenly our shop is participating. Andrew spoke with a hint of confusion. Violet tilted her head. Our shop is popular, right? Is there any problem? We have to come up with a new dessert. We also need to create next season's new items. I see. Violet understood. Confectionery shops often introduce new items each season. For instance, treats for events like Valentine's Day or Christmas are needed. We have our wedding next month. I can't take on more. That's why I wanted to hear your ideas, Violet. Andrew clasped his hands together, making a pleading gesture. Violet sighed softly. Can't be helped. I'll bring my recipe notebook tomorrow. That would be a great help. Make sure you let everyone know it is my idea. That's all they talked about at that time. But the next day, an incident occurred. After work, Violet took her recipe notebook and headed to the kitchen. Sorry to keep you waiting. She entered the kitchen. But Andrew was nowhere to be seen. Maybe he's still working? Being the company heir must be busy. Thinking this, Violet decided to wait for Andrew. While looking through her recipe notebook, she suddenly felt someone's presence behind her. Andrew? Were you working? Violet turned around. But Andrew wasn't there. Oh? Violet? What are you doing here? Ah, Mr. Carter. It was Mr. Carter. He worked for the confectionery company but wasn't a pastry chef. He was more of an office worker, handling tasks like accounting. It seemed he came to lock up. Do you still have something to do here? Yes. I'm here to help Andrew with his work. Andrews. Oh, I see. Mr. Carter laughed unpleasantly. Was he thinking something bad? Sensing this, Violet's expression soured. Suddenly, Mr. Carter shouted. Even if you're dating the boss's son, I can't overlook such behavior from an employee. I'm not. I was just. Quiet. Don't make excuses. Mr. Carter advanced towards her. In a reflex, Violet threw him her recipe notebook. Ah. Mr. Carter covered his face and crouched down. Andrew came there. What's going on? I heard a loud noise, Violet. Are you okay? What happened? Andrew. It's just. Violet explained everything to Andrew. But, in reality, nothing had happened. Mr. Carter had just found that Violet and Andrew were meeting up. He jumped to unsavory conclusions on his own. Violet, upset by such bizarre suspicions, wore an annoyed expression. This displeased Mr. Carter, who attempted to reprimand her. "So you threw Mr. Carter the recipe notebook, and he ended up like this?" "Yes, I'm sorry." Violet apologized. Meanwhile, Andrew checked on Mr. Carter. The area hit by the notebook was turning red. But luckily, there were no serious injuries. "I'll report this to the president. You'll be fired immediately." "That's not fair." "Shut up. Brace yourself," Mr. Carter shouted angrily. Then Mr. Carter hurried out of the kitchen. "What should I do, Andrew?" "It's okay. I'll handle it. But if it gets reported to your father, our relationship might be opposed." Violet was most afraid of that. "Don't worry. I'll always protect you. Andrew, leave it to me." Later, this incident reached the president's ears. But Violet faced no punishment. It was because Andrew had intervened. "Andrew protected me." Violet thought so. Their relationship seemed to grow even stronger. But all of this was also part of Andrew's scheme. A few days later, Violet would come to realize the whole truth. After the kitchen argument, Andrew said something to Violet. "I feel bad asking this, Violet, but can you keep quiet about providing the idea?" "Why?" "You know, because of the matter of Mr. Carter." On the day of the incident, Andrew was alone in the kitchen. While Andrew was working on a new creation, Mr. Carter came in. There was an accident during Andrew's work, and a cooking utensil hit Mr. Carter's face. Andrew wanted to make it seem like that's what had happened. Reluctantly, Violet agreed. "Sorry, Violet. It's actually your recipe. I'll return the notebook later." "It's okay. You coordinated everything to protect me." "Well, yeah. If that's the story we're going with," Mr. Carter agreed to it. Andrew spoke of the effort it took to align their testimonies. Violet felt deeply grateful to Andrew for his efforts on her behalf. However, a few days later, Violet, who had stayed late to clean up, was about to leave after changing. Passing by the office, she heard Andrew's voice. "Andrew's still here. I should say hello." But as she was about to enter, she froze at Andrew's words. "And that's how it went. Thanks to you, Mr. Carter." "Mr. Carter, what does that mean?" Pondering, Violet listened closely to Andrew's voice. Soon, she heard Andrew's laughter. Then, his true feelings came out. "Violet's just a convenient tool. Now that I've got her recipes, I don't need her anymore." Violet was stunned. Was I deceived? She covered her mouth, trying hard not to make a sound. But she couldn't stop the tears from flowing. That recipe is really good. It's a waste to let that woman keep it. From there, she could only listen to the truth she didn't want to hear, in Andrew's gleeful voice. He had ordered other pastry chefs to scold Violet. Then he would intervene, earning Violet's trust. He also set up the situation with Mr. Carter, making Violet feel indebted and trapped. And in the confusion of that moment, he was glad to have stolen Violet's recipes. Andrew said that. And then he added, "If she tries to escape, I'll just confront her with a shocking truth." Andrew smiled unpleasantly. "What does he mean?" Violet wondered, as Andrew answered himself. It's about fraud. She's already complicit in it without knowing." Andrew sneered. At that moment, Violet's mobile phone fell from her pocket. It made a sound as it hit the floor, and Andrew noticed the phone. Violet could see this through the gap in the door. "I have to get away," she thought, but her legs wouldn't move. Andrew quickly spotted Violet. He looked at her with a menacing expression. "Were you listening?" Well, it doesn't matter. If you try to run, I'll just accuse you. Andrew's lips curled into a smirk. Violet felt an intense fear of that smile. After that, Violet, unable to escape from Andrew, led a life dictated by him. She was also boldly made to help with the fraud he mentioned. However, Violet, being inherently honest and kind, couldn't endure such a life. Eventually, about a month later, Violet was found on the first floor of her apartment. There were no witnesses, but a passerby had heard a loud noise. When they checked, they found Violet lying below her room. According to the police, it's likely Violet did it herself. However, Andrew's laptop was found nearby. Perhaps Violet intended to expose Andrew's fraud by doing so. But the police examined the laptop and found no noteworthy data. I had suspected Andrew, who lived with her, from the moment I heard of the incident. However, on that day, Andrew was not at home. He was out of state for work. So, Andrew couldn't be the culprit. I had no choice but to accept that. Afterward, along with Andrew and his parents, we completed Violet's funeral. Even after everything ended, I remained in a daze. I couldn't bring myself to do anything. If only my husband were here, maybe he could have helped ease the loneliness. Violet, why? That was all I could mutter. I felt powerless. For several days, I cried, thinking that. Then, a week passed after Violet's death. I had to accept the reality of losing Violet. Just as I was beginning to come to terms with it, a letter arrived. When I looked at the sender's name on the letter delivered to my mailbox, it was written Violet. Violet! I blurted out without thinking. I hurried back to the living room. Why now? Why did I receive a letter from Violet? There's no use just thinking about it. I carefully opened the letter. There were several writing papers in it. Taking out only the writing paper, I continued reading while imagining of Violet's face. To Mom. It detailed the circumstances that had led Violet to her situation. The truth Violet penned ignited anger in me. It meticulously described how she was deceived by Andrew, her recipes stolen and forced into fraud. And finally, there was this line written in the letter. Please take revenge on Andrew for me. That's my last request, Violet. As I finished reading, a single tear fell onto the table. I clenched the letter, overwhelmed by a sense of powerless anger. At the same time, I resolved to take revenge on behalf of Violet. Andrew, you were only pretending to be a good person. It's my fault for not realizing it. So, I'll commend you for deceiving me until now. But that ends here. You made a fatal mistake. For taking away my dear daughter, I'll make you regret it until the end of your life. I bit my lip and reached for my mobile phone. I quickly arranged for a taxi. Violet's letter had an address written on it. There must be something important there. Violet. I should go here, right? Clutching the letter, I jumped into the taxi. Heading to the address. It was a local bank. According to Violet's letter, there seems to be something in a safe deposit box. I showed my ID to the staff and explained the situation. I also showed the bank card and key for the safe deposit box. The staff then led me to the safe deposit box. Violet had apparently told them I would be coming. I opened the box in the room I was led to. Inside were documents and a notebook. This is. I quietly read on. The documents were written by Violet. They detailed the methods and content of the fraud, and the people involved in it. The notebook was Violet's recipe notebook, containing recipes of products sold at Andrew's shop. Violet, you did all this. Even just from this, I could tell Violet's meticulous nature. Tears flowed as I thought of Violet. But I couldn't just sit and mourn. I quickly put the documents and notebook into my bag. Then, I noticed some jewelry. It was a heart-shaped pendant with a yellow sticky note attached. Treating it so carelessly, you wouldn't do that, Violet. Muttering, I carefully picked up the pendant. Then I saw the words on the sticky note. Instantly, I was shocked and disturbed. I clutched the pendant tightly. Violet, I'll definitely take revenge. Just wait. With renewed determination, I left the bank. I headed straight to a local confectionery shop. It was the family shop of Wendy, Violet's close friend. Wendy, whom I had seen at Violet's funeral, was at the shop front. Hello, Wendy. Violet's mom? About the other day. Wendy hugged me, and I hugged her back. There's something I want to talk about. Do you have a moment? Wendy looked towards the back. A man, presumably Wendy's father, nodded. Then, please come this way. Wendy led me to the back of the shop. The back was a residence. I was taken to the living room. As Wendy served coffee, I spoke abruptly. Actually, I received a letter from Violet. From Violet? Wendy was surprised and confused. Read it first. We'll talk after that. I handed Violet's letter to Wendy. Wendy read it silently, with great concentration. Eventually, she, like me, was in tears. Then, she handed the letter back to me. Thank you. I'll give this back to you first. So, what do you think? We can't forgive him. I won't. Wendy clenched her fist. I felt relieved knowing Wendy shared my feelings. Will you help me then? Yes. But what should I do? You're Violet's best friend, so you know about this, right? I showed her Violet's recipe notebook from the safe deposit box. Wendy immediately affirmed. This was in the safe deposit box, but the moment I saw the contents of the box, it was as if someone had whispered an idea to me. I decided to use it as part of my plan for revenge against Andrew, as Violet's wish. I explained the plan to Wendy. Then, I entrusted Violet's recipe notebook to her. Can you do this for me? For Violet's sake, yes. Wendy strongly agreed. That's the first step prepared. I felt a bit relieved. Then I quietly stood up and shook hands with Wendy. Thank you, I'm counting on you. Saying this, I left Wendy's place. I headed to another location. It was a branch of the confectionery shop where Violet used to work. The shop was quite far from the one where Violet had worked. I spent a lot of time getting there. Upon entering, I asked a woman who looked like a part-time employee. Excuse me, is Mr. Carter here? The woman looked puzzled. Then I added, my daughter worked at another shop and was helped by Mr. Carter. I showed her the employee card given to me by Andrew after Violet's funeral. The woman immediately smiled. Soon Mr. Carter came out from the back. Seeing my face, he turned pale. He recognized me as Violet's mother from the funeral. Can we talk outside for a bit? If you refuse, you know what will happen, right? I smiled at him, deliberately gentle. Thanks to that, Mr. Carter agreed readily. We moved to a nearby park, and Mr. Carter immediately apologized. I'm so sorry. I was threatened too. What are you talking about? I mean, Mr. Carter, without being asked, started confessing everything he had done. He was only approached by Andrew under threat, and he had no choice but to call out Violet. He wasn't involved in anything else. It was all Andrew who dragged him into evil. He never thought Violet would take her own life. Mr. Carter apologized to me, crying. Apologies won't change anything. Violet will never come back. I couldn't help but raise my voice. Mr. Carter closed his mouth, frightened. Realizing I said too much, I took a deep breath. Then, with a stern look, I asked Mr. Carter. If you're willing to apologize, will you do me a favor? Yes. Then, please testify about this incident. And don't say anything to Andrew. Understood? Once confirmed, Mr. Carter agreed, though fearfully. Afterward, I had Mr. Carter testify everything. I recorded all of it and even let him write and sign a statement of his testimony. That's the second step done. Now, Wendy, I'm counting on you. I muttered softly, watching Mr. Carter's dejected figure return to the store. After a while, I received an invitation from Andrew. A sweets exhibition. It was the invitation to the very sweets exhibition. Andrew didn't know I was aware of the truth. So, the invitation boldly included these words. We'll be showcasing sweets Violet praised highly. Please come for Violet's sake. I almost tore it up in anger. But the preparations would all be for nothing by doing so. I managed to restrain myself and waited for the day of the sweets exhibition. Day after day. I watched the calendar. Finally, the first day of the sweets exhibition arrived. I went to the venue with Violet's employee card on my chest. Upon entering, Andrew greeted me. He approached with a dubious smile, offering a handshake. Scarlett, I'm glad you could make it. Yes. Violet was looking forward to it, wasn't she? Yes. I've prepared my masterpiece for this occasion. He guided me to a display filled with magnificent cakes and chocolates. I asked Andrew with a forced smile. Which ones did you make? This time, I made chocolates. Valentine's Day is coming up, after all. Andrew pointed to chocolates in the center of the display. Stylishly decorated chocolates. But these were made from Violet's recipes. Thinking that made me seethe with anger. Then, a woman's voice came from behind. May I interview you? I turned to see a woman holding a file. Apparently a magazine journalist, with a camera. Andrew and the woman talked. After a while, the woman tilted her head, puzzled. Excuse me, are you sure you made these? Andrew was taken aback by her words. Then he retorted with a sneer. Of course I did. What are you talking about? But I saw similar ones at another store. What? What do you mean? Andrew raised his voice. Several guests in the venue turned to look. The woman continued. The explanation and design are very similar. That's impossible. Which store is that? Andrew's voice grew louder. The woman, though scared, pointed to a distant location. Andrew rushed off. And I quickly followed. Soon, we arrived in front of a certain store. There, Wendy was standing by the storefront. Wendy nodded slightly when she saw me. Then she addressed Andrew. Long time no see. It's you! You stole our shop's recipes. Stole? That's not true. Wendy smiled. Meanwhile, Andrew, red-faced, raised his voice. Then what's this? It's almost identical to our product. He pointed to chocolates lined up. Almost identical to those in his shop. Then Andrew pointed to a sign at the storefront and shouted. And this? Doesn't melt easily even in warm places. What's this about? It's our newly developed product. Don't joke with me. This is exactly the same as the unique method I devised. Andrew's voice stirred up murmurs among the bystanders. But Wendy, undisturbed, retorted. That's just a coincidence. But if it's the same, please stop using it at your shop. What did you say? This is made using a patented method developed by my father years ago. Patented method? Andrew's face turned pale. Actually, Violet's recipe used that patented method. But Violet had no intention of infringing the patent. It is because she planned to sell it with Wendy. This is a recipe Violet came up with for our future shop together. That's... You stole the recipe from Violet. Wendy's words silenced Andrew. Clearly losing his composure, Andrew was questioned by the earlier woman. What about it? Did you steal the recipe? No, Violet was our employee, Anne. Andrew started making inconsistent excuses. But nobody believed him. Eventually, Andrew was unable to withstand the surrounding gazes, and he fled the scene. I quickly followed Andrew. The woman from earlier also followed. Returning to his shop space, Andrew began hurriedly packing up. Apparently, he intended to act as if nothing had happened. But I wouldn't allow it. I approached Andrew. Wait! We're not done talking. So, Violet provided the recipe. What's your complaint? I have one. What you did wasn't just that, was it? Just that, what do you mean? Sweat beaded on Andrew's forehead. Knowing this was a critical moment, I raised my voice. Your shop has been evading taxes. Ah. Andrew instinctively covered his mouth. The surrounding gazes intensified on him. I continued, calmly detailing Andrew's actions. First, you kept a separate record of pre-ordered products, not accounting for them in sales. I don't know what you're talking about. Moreover, you falsified inventory records for raw materials. That's how you evaded taxes, right? I don't know anything about that. Andrew attempted to deny loudly. I then produced a copy of the documentation Violet had compiled. Violet detailed the method here. Look at this. I scattered the documents on the spot. Several people rushed to pick them up. They began comparing and discussing among themselves. Soon, the journalist questioned Andrew. What about this? According to these documents, her story seems true. Andrew was silent in response to the journalist's question. Soon, similar voices arose from the audience. I work in accounting, and this is clearly fraud. It's definitely tax evasion. Faced with these accusations, Andrew's patience finally snapped. Shut up! None of this concerns you. I didn't do anything. This can't be evidence. Andrew's outburst silenced the crowd. In the midst of this, I took out my mobile phone. Then, I played a certain audio recording. Listen up. Mark the inventory as less. But that would mean... Don't argue with me. You can't escape this now. The voices of Violet and Andrew echoed in the venue. People from afar also started to gather closer. The recording continued. What about today's pre-order receipts? I destroyed them. They were cash payments, convenient for fudging the sales. That's again? Shut up. If we paid taxes properly, we'd never make any money. The recording ended with those words from Andrew. I glanced and saw Andrew's face had turned ashen. This recording was in a pendant Violet had. It was an IC recorder. That heart-shaped one? Yes. It was an IC recorder. Violet left it as irrefutable evidence. Andrew crumbled. Then, a security guard arrived with a police officer. The officer looked at Andrew and me, then asked Andrew, who was almost collapsing. I've heard quite a bit. Is it true that you were evading taxes? No. That is. We'll ask you more thoroughly at the police station. For now, would you please come with us? The officer spoke calmly to Andrew. But his eyes were not kind. I handed the officer Mr. Carter's testimony. Then I told him about Violet's suicide. I understand. We'll investigate that as well. The officer said, casting a stern glance at Andrew. But Andrew had no strength left to argue. Afterward, Andrew was arrested on charges of tax evasion and other offenses. Violet's case was also thoroughly investigated. However, it wasn't that Andrew directly caused Violet's death. In the end, he was only charged with assault for Violet's case. Nevertheless, the arrest had a significant impact. In just a few months, Andrew's father's confectionery company was driven into bankruptcy. Naturally, all the operating stores were closed. The shop where Violet worked became a rented space. I don't know what will happen to Andrew's sentencing, but I hope he reflects on his actions. After Andrew was taken away by the police, Wendy distributed the chocolates to the people at the venue. These chocolates were designed by my best friend. While handing them out, I wished Violet could have seen this. Especially the customers smiling as they tasted the chocolates. Violet would have loved to see that. Tears welled up in my eyes. But I had no time to cry. Because the sale of those chocolates had been decided. We want to name the product Violet. Because it's a light violet color, and most importantly, it was Violet's idea. Wendy spoke with a smile. Then she added, "Would you write the product tag for us? We want to display it with Violet's photo at the store." So, for the first time in my life, I started working on creating a store display tag. I hope Violet would like it. Speaking to Violet's smiling photo, I reached for a light purple-colored pencil.
It's cold. Mom, help me.
Margaret, my daughter who should be at my ex-husband Walter's house, suddenly called my mobile phone asking for help. In the dead of winter, with heavy snow falling, Margaret had been locked in the storage shed by her stepmother Ashley for over 4 hours. In a panic, I rushed over and managed to break open the shed door, only to find Margaret shivering and barely conscious inside.
Margaret, hang in there.
No matter how many times I called her, Margaret didn't respond, her face pale and bloodless. I hurriedly got her into the waiting ambulance and headed to the hospital, praying all the way. I'll never forgive Walter and Ashley for doing such a terrible thing to Margaret. Clenching my fists tightly, I resolved to seek revenge. I am Natasha, 29 years old. My husband Walter was my high school classmate and is now an office worker. We got married 8 years ago, and then I became a housewife. We were blessed with a child and lived happily as a family of 3 with our 7-year-old daughter Margaret. But things changed when Margaret started kindergarten. Walter began to look down on me, and unable to bear it, I divorced him 6 months ago. Of course I wanted to take custody of Margaret, but Walter strongly opposed.
How can a housewife like you raise Margaret?
I couldn't argue, but I couldn't let Walter take custody of Margaret just like that. The court ruled in his favor due to my lack of income and having no living parents to rely on, and Walter took custody of Margaret.
Margaret, I'm sorry, Mom can't live with you anymore.
My words broke off in tears, and Margaret, clinging to me, cried out loud.
I don't want to be away from Mom. I'm sorry. I promise, I'll come to get you as soon as I can.
I hugged Margaret gently, making a pinky promise. Wiping her tears.
Okay, I'll wait.
Margaret forced a smile and said. Since living apart from Margaret, I met her about once a month, enjoying shopping and chatting together, cherishing our mother-daughter time. Margaret became more clingy, always sticking close to me. Our happy times flew by, and every goodbye left Margaret with tears in her eyes, making me feel lonely too. Eager to live with Margaret again, I threw myself into job hunting and finally found a job, making ends meet. But still financially unable to take Margaret back, I worked hard, saving every penny I could. Then, 2 months after the divorce, I received a postcard from Walter announcing his remarriage, complete with a photo. His new wife, Ashley, was visibly pregnant. She looked like she was almost due for delivery. Was he cheating on me while we were married? Suspecting Walter, I called him. Congratulations on your marriage, Walter. How do you know that? A postcard arrived, with your photo. Didn't you send it? No, I didn't. Walter gave a vague answer, so I'm sure that postcard was sent by Ashley just to harass us. You seem so happy, good for you. Thank you. He seemed embarrassed. When I asked to speak to Margaret over the phone,
Mom, Ashley's going to have a baby soon.
Margaret told me excitedly.
Margaret, don't say unnecessary things.
I heard Walter's panicked voice, and then he abruptly hung up the phone. So it's true. He was cheating even before the divorce. He's always been bad at lying or deceiving, so his panic probably confirms it. Yet, I feel ashamed for not realizing it sooner. From that day, Walter hardly let me see Margaret. When I said I wanted to talk to Margaret, he was blatantly annoyed.
Ashley's getting annoyed, so stop calling, okay? I just want to see Margaret. Please, let me see her. Are you trying to ruin my family? Stop it already.
Walter said that and hung up, not answering my calls after. I'm Margaret's mom. It's frustrating not to even be able to see her. I felt down from the helplessness but couldn't give up. I immediately went to a mobile phone shop and bought a pink kid's mobile phone that Margaret would like. Then, I waited near her elementary school and looked for Margaret as she was coming home.
Margaret. Welcome home. Mom.
When Margaret saw me, her face lit up with joy, and she ran to hug me.
I'm sorry we couldn't meet for so long. Yeah. I was lonely, but I was patient. Dad said if I'm good, I can see Mom. Yay!
I handed the kid's mobile phone to the excited Margaret.
Call me anytime. But it's a secret from Dad and your new mom, so don't get caught, okay? Wow. Thanks, Mom. Got it, it's a secret.
Seeing Margaret's happy face made me smile too. From that day, we messaged each other daily, talking about school and friends.
Margaret, are you having any trouble?
When I asked, worried.
Don't worry, Mom. I'm okay.
She always replied. Each time I saw those words, I felt relieved.
I'm always on your side, Margaret. I love you.
I told her every day. Even though we were apart and couldn't meet, I felt happy to be connected with her through messages. 2 weeks later. In the evening after work, it was snowing. Shivering in the cold, I was heading home when Margaret suddenly called me.
Mom, it's cold, help me.
Margaret's desperate voice came through, asking for my help, and my heart raced.
Where are you now? In the house's storage shed.
According to Margaret, Ashley had locked her in there for over 4 hours. I was almost panicking but tried to stay calm not to scare Margaret.
I'll come to help you right away, just wait a little bit. Okay, I understand.
Right after hanging up, I tried calling Walter's mobile phone several times, but he didn't answer. I was so worried about Margaret that I hurried to Walter's house. Upon arriving, the house was dark, no car, and it seemed no one was inside. What is going on here? I tried to open the storage shed where Margaret was said to be locked in, but it was locked. I broke the door with a shovel nearby and found Margaret inside, curled up and shivering from the cold.
Margaret! It's Mom!
Margaret, barely conscious, had a weak response to her name, and she felt very hot to the touch. I immediately called an ambulance and accompanied Margaret to the hospital. Why did this happen? During the transport, I kept repeating these words in my head, looking at Margaret's ashen face. I had been too reassured by Margaret's messages saying, "Don't worry, I'm okay." Why didn't I realize something was wrong sooner? I continued to blame myself for my naivety. At the hospital, the doctor told me she's in a very critical condition. Holding Margaret's cold hand as she lay in the bed, unconscious, I felt a burning anger. I will never forgive Walter and Ashley for what they did to Margaret. I'll make sure they pay. I had decided on my revenge. That night, Walter called me. Apparently, he had heard from the neighbors about the ambulance at his house and my presence.
Don't take Margaret away like that. Give her back. Don't interfere with our parenting.
I could hear Ashley's yelling voice too, perhaps on speaker mode.
The custody is mine. I won't let you get away with this. That's right. We'll report this to the police.
Amidst their uproar, I took a deep breath and calmly said, "Margaret has passed away." "What?" Walter gasped. After a moment of silence, he asked with a trembling voice,
You're lying, right?
"It's all your fault." Then, in contrast to Walter, I heard Ashley laughing loudly.
Ah ha ha ha. Good riddance. She always compared me to you and never called me Mom. I never liked her anyway.
I was shocked. Could it be that for such reasons, this woman was harsh on a 7-year-old Margaret, even locking her in a storage shed?
Besides, Margaret never looked like me. I even wondered if she was really my child.
Encouraged by Ashley's words, Walter joined in. I was barely able to contain my rising fury.
Was Margaret really my child? Maybe she was another man's child?
Their mocking laughter came from the other side of the phone. It was too much to bear. I didn't want to talk to these scum any longer. With trembling hands, I said,
I'll handle the funeral arrangements. I'll contact you when the date is set.
After hanging up, I sighed deeply. How could they say such horrible things in this situation? I couldn't stop my tears from falling, feeling both sad and frustrated. The next day, I received an unexpected call from Mrs. Simmons, who lives next door to Walter's house. We were close before, and she told me a shocking fact. I immediately called the place she mentioned, confirmed the fact she told me, and gathered some more evidence. Now I can bring them down. Wait for me, Margaret. Then I told Walter I want to discuss Margaret's funeral arrangements, and arranged to visit his house the following Sunday. On Sunday, I visited Walter's house with a man, and Walter and Ashley reluctantly welcomed us.
You were supposed to handle everything, weren't you? But there are funeral expenses and other things, right? I don't have that much money.
Huh? What a hassle. Walter scratched his head and, turning to the man sitting with us, arrogantly crossed his arms and demanded,
Hey, make the funeral for Margaret cheaper. Just give us the cheapest plan with a discount.
They both seemed to mistake the companion for a funeral director, as I had told them we were meeting for funeral arrangements.
Hey, Walter. Do we even need to have a funeral? It's like throwing money away, right?
We have to, for appearances.
Well, Margaret's life insurance will pay out a lot, and the rest depends on my negotiation skills.
Walter, with a triumphant smirk, was adoringly gazed at by Ashley.
Life insurance, huh? Wonder if that will go smoothly.
As I muttered. Walter glared at me and said, Huh? So, I presented a voice recorder in front of him. Please listen to this first. What played was a recording of Ashley yelling and Margaret crying out. The sound alone was heart-wrenching. Walter and Ashley looked at each other in confusion.
This isn't Margaret's voice. Yeah, right. Must be someone else.
They desperately tried to deny it was Margaret, but I looked at them squarely.
No. This voice is definitely Margaret's. Don't you recognize the voice of someone you live with every day?
Still, Walter and Ashley insisted it was a mistake. So, I took out my mobile phone and showed them a video.
Still going to make excuses after this?
It was a video of Ashley forcibly trying to lock a resisting Margaret in the storage shed. Both the woman and Margaret's faces were clearly visible in the footage. There was no way they could deny it now.
Why do you have such a video? The dash camera at Mrs. Simmons' parking lot next door caught it. Some cameras still record even if the car isn't moving. The audio was recorded by Mrs. Simmons too, who was worried about Margaret.
Mrs. Simmons had always been fond of Margaret since she was little. She told me over the phone how she had been concerned about Margaret's well-being since I left the house. Gradually, she noticed Margaret losing her energy and thought something was off when she started hearing yelling from the house.
Mrs. Simmons was worried and reported to Child Services. Ashley, you turned away the social workers who came several times without letting them see Margaret, right? Shut up. It was just too much trouble. Yeah, having them come over is just annoying. It's Margaret's fault for not listening, it was just discipline. We were just trying to correct her behavior. What's wrong with that? Yelling and forcibly locking her in a storage shed is discipline? Don't be ridiculous. Margaret isn't your toy.
Walter and Ashley, still defiant, even had faint smirks on their faces. I decided it was time to introduce the man who had been with me.
Just so you know, this man isn't a funeral director. He's the director of Child Services.
The man, who had been quietly observing until now.
Sorry for the late introduction,
he said, extending his business card to Walter. Walter and Ashley's faces turned pale instantly. The director's expression became stern.
What you've done is a serious crime.
And he said in a cold voice,
You're exaggerating. As a director, you should understand that scolding a misbehaving child is a parent's duty. Exactly. Just titles and no sense in what you're saying.
Walter and Ashley were still defiant.
Enough already. Everything you've done has been testified by Margaret.
At my words, Walter momentarily opened his mouth in shock. Then, he suddenly burst out laughing.
Ahahaha. How can someone who's dead do that? Ridiculous. Yeah, what's she talking about? Ahahaha.
As they pointed at me and laughed, I smiled and informed them. Oh, Margaret is very much alive.
What?
That was a lie to prevent you from taking her back. Hearing this, Walter and Ashley were shocked, their mouths opening and closing like fish.
So, Margaret was a nuisance to you, right? You clearly said that. Then why didn't you give me custody when we divorced?
That's because I didn't want to pay you child support.
What? That's outrageous. You're the worst, not just as a husband, but as a father too.
I was furious to realize the true shallowness of this man who had fought me in court to take away my dear Margaret.
I'll take Margaret's custody back through court if I have to, and I'll make sure you both pay.
Natasha, don't say scary things. You can have Margaret, okay? Isn't that enough?
Not at all. Isn't reflecting and atoning for what you've done also a father's responsibility?
Walter still didn't seem to be taking things seriously, so I decided to press further.
And one more thing. Ashley was pregnant before we got divorced, right? What are you talking about?
Walter's gaze wavered, and Ashley looked down, visibly shaken.
No matter how much you try to cover it up, a simple investigation will reveal the truth. Be prepared to pay compensation. That's nonsense now. Can't we just let bygones be bygones? I apologize, so please, let it go. I will never forgive you. That's why I've filed a police report.
Upon hearing about the police, Walter's attitude changed abruptly, and he stood up to apologize deeply.
I don't want to get arrested. Margaret's alive, right? Natasha, please overlook this. I beg you.
Beside him, the previously defiant Ashley also bowed deeply to me.
I'm about to give birth. Please, Natasha. Withdraw the report right now.
I despised these two for their selfishness to the core. The director also said sternly, "Why don't you just give up?" But suddenly, Walter and Ashley tried to flee, rushing to the door. However, they were promptly arrested by the waiting police officers.
It's not my fault. Ashley did everything. What? You're the one who told me to lock her in the shed.
The two of them were shouting and resisting in vain. Their commotion attracted the neighbors, who gathered around. In front of the crowd, Walter and Ashley were taken away in the police car. Some time later, Walter and Ashley were sentenced to serve time in a trial. I filed for a change of guardianship and finally got Margaret back.
I'm happy that I can be with you,
Margaret says with the brightest smile. Determined to ensure a fulfilling life for my daughter, I resolved, I will make Margaret happy, no matter what. Thanks for taking care of my daughter this past month. I'll come pick her up tomorrow.
What are you talking about?
Sherry, my sister-in-law, who had been traveling for a month, seemed still to be at the airport, as I could hear the sound of boarding announcements through the phone. In contrast to my calm response, she began to panic.
Wait, what? No, what are you talking about? She's there, right? I left Daisy in your condo's garage.
Daisy is her daughter, my niece.
I haven't seen her. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb. I sent you a text, so you know. I haven't received any text. You're lying. I know you're lying. Don't play with me.
Sherry screamed over the phone, panicking.
What are you going to do about it? I left Daisy with you. You're responsible if anything happens.
After hanging up once, Sherry tried calling Daisy's child safety phone, but not being able to reach her, she continued to panic. She called me back, even more frantic, so I suggested she might want to go home first.
You're right. That's a good idea.
Upon her return home, she found her husband Leon, Daisy, and me, the three of us together. Sherry seemed to want to ask why the three of us were together.
Sherry, I've just been hearing all about it from these two. What?
At Leon's words, she turned pale. My name is Bonnie, and until a few years ago, I worked a regular office job. Upon turning 40, I became independent and started working as a freelance illustrator. With the increase in income, I now live alone in a condo. My work is primarily home-based, and I only leave the house for essential errands like going to the grocery store or meetings with clients. I'm not married, nor do I have a partner, but I'm satisfied with my life. Friends sometimes ask if I'm lonely, but I've never thought about it that way. I'm more fulfilled by my work and have no plans to look for a partner. I do worry about old age a little, but I think to myself, I'll cross that bridge when I get to it, to which I'm surprised at my own optimism. Today, after meeting a deadline for an illustration, I took a break at 3 p.m. and looked at the calendar. Then, I realized that my brother Leon's birthday was coming up soon. Leon, 5 years my senior, works in sales at a major publishing company and often goes on long business trips. Sometimes, he brings back souvenirs from his travels. Last month, he dropped by and brought some cookies as a souvenir, so I let him in, made some coffee, and we enjoyed the cookies together.
I keep telling you, you don't need to bring anything for me. Buy more for Sherry and Daisy. But I need to see your face from time to time. Don't want to find you laying on the floor.
Leon has always been like this, considerate or meddlesome, but it's one of his good traits. Sherry and Daisy are his wife and daughter, therefore my sister-in-law and niece. I haven't told Leon, but I find Sherry a bit difficult to get along with. She's very bright and always dresses fashionably, with her nails done and in the latest trends, giving off a very glamorous impression. It's not that I mind that, but she often looks down on me for being single. At a family gathering at Christmas, she laughed upon learning I had neither a partner nor a love interest. Hey, are you the type who thinks you can afford to wait because you're always young and beautiful? Don't you know about the marriage boat?
I think marriage and romance vary by individual. It's not necessary to have a partner.
She laughed again at my response. I couldn't tell if it was the alcohol or what, but she kept teasing me about the same thing, and it became tiring to deal with. When choosing a condo to live alone, being away from Leon's family was definitely a criterion. That's how much I was fed up with her. However, I got along well with my niece Daisy. She turned 10 this year and seems to go to school carrying a cute light blue backpack. I haven't seen her in it, but she told me about it when she came to visit.
Bonnie, you're so good at drawing.
Daisy, who had been watching me work on illustrations, was impressed and stared at the drawing on the computer screen. Wow, I wish I could draw too.
Oh, want to try? Really?
Yeah, there's still plenty of time before the deadline, so you can have a go. Daisy sat in front of the computer and excitedly started moving the pen. What she drew on the screen was her light blue backpack. She mentioned it was heavy because she also carries a tablet in it. Considering it's even heavier with a water bottle in the summer, I was really impressed by how strong she was despite her small size. According to Daisy, Sherry spends her days as a housewife, and when Leon is away on business trips, she does whatever she pleases. For dinner or lunch on days when school is out, they eat frozen meals or pizza delivery. I'm the one who always does the laundry, and Mom only does it once in a while.
Really?
Yeah, and she gets really mad when my shoes are muddy after PE.
Why? What does Mom do at home?
She's always on her phone or watching TV. Daisy tries not to upset her mom by staying in her room or going out to the park or the library. Hearing this makes me wonder about parenting, but it's tricky to know if it's my place to say anything. There was another time when the family gathered, and I saw Sherry scolding at quiet Daisy harshly. I think Daisy had spilled some tea, but I thought it wasn't something to get so mad about. It could easily be wiped up with paper towels. Mom is scary. She gets mad at everything I say, so I just keep quiet. Daisy's offhand remark about her mom as she was leaving, after drawing her light blue backpack, stuck with me like a splinter. I remembered that day was a sunny weekend, and Sherry had left Daisy with me because she was going on a day trip with her mom friends. I never imagined receiving a similar text on my mobile phone just a few days later. The autumn leaves in the nearby park had deepened, and it was getting to the point where you missed the warmth of the sun. That kind of coldness had arrived. When I returned to my condo after running a small errand, I saw the silhouette of a girl standing alone by the parking lot. She was wearing a light blue backpack, and I was surprised to recognize her face.
Daisy?
When I called out to her, her anxious eyes looked up at me. It was indeed Daisy.
What are you doing here all alone? And what's with the luggage?
Next to her was a small carry-on case, making it look as though she had run away from home. Mom said to go to your house. Seeing my confusion, Daisy gestured towards my bag, saying, on the mobile phone. Perhaps there was a text on my mobile phone. I hurriedly took out my phone from my bag, and indeed, there was a text from Sherry, albeit recently. Bonnie, sorry for the sudden request. I'm going on a trip with a friend for a month starting today. Please take care of my daughter. After reading it, an inarticulate exclamation escaped my lips, but I quickly closed my mouth. Of course, it was out of confusion, but considering Daisy was probably just as bewildered, we decided to go inside. Once inside, Daisy's cheeks were as red as apples, and her hands were very cold. I made her some hot cocoa to warm up a bit and offered her some snacks while listening to her story. Up until a short while ago, Daisy had been drawing in her notebook in her room. Sherry entered Daisy's room without knocking, handed her a carry-on case, and said, Daisy, get ready, we're going to Bonnie's house. Mom won't be home for a month, so bring your backpack, okay? Understood? Okay. Thus, Daisy quickly packed her notebook, pencil case, textbooks, and tablet into her backpack. During this time, Sherry was on the phone, seeming quite restless.
Really? That's great. Don't tell me, are you drinking already? It's too early.
Sherry's voice was high-pitched and filled the house. Hearing her mother's unusual laughter from downstairs, Daisy covered her ears. After the phone call ended, Sherry's voice returned to normal, and then Daisy was left at that place with her luggage. When Daisy got out of the car, Sherry explained to her.
Be good, I'm leaving you with Bonnie for a month.
She was told to wait here and had been waiting under the cold sky. Despite the sunlight, it was quite a cold season. Thinking about what would have happened if Daisy had caught a cold made me feel a rising anger at the situation.
But does Dad know about this?
I don't think so. Mom doesn't seem to contact Dad much. She told me so as she munched on chocolate cookies. While I thought how cute she looked with cookie crumbs on her cheeks, I felt it was wrong not to inform Leon and decided to call him later. Bonnie, I don't want to be with Mom anymore. Suddenly, Daisy said this while staring at the rim of her juice glass. The girl who had been happily eating cookies now had a troubled look, far too mature for her age. Why? Because Mom gets angry easily, and she throws things at me, like the trash can. I hate it.
The trash can?
I haven't done anything wrong. She says I'm in the way, tells me to get lost, and throws things. My teachers at school won't believe me either. I can't stand it. Tears were streaming down her face. It must have been very hard for her, as she continued to cry, and I spent the time soothing her back and offering tissues until she calmed down. Clearly, what was happening to her was not normal. Convinced of this, I decided to call Leon to see if he could come back and help. Stepping away for a bit where Daisy couldn't see, I pondered how to explain the situation to him, then an idea came to me. All right, this might work. I murmured softly and dialed Leon's number.
What? Daisy? Yeah, what did you say?
Leon seemed quite shaken as he listened to the story, his voice trembling slightly. At first, he joked, saying it must be a prank, not funny, but as I continued, he believed me and listened seriously. When I shared my idea for a plan I had come up with, Leon agreed to it, saying he would take time off work to help. All right then, please take care of it. Don't worry, Daisy is in good hands. I hung up, then quietly deleted the text from Sherry from my mobile phone. Looking towards the living room, I wondered if Daisy had calmed down and quietly went back. I should splurge a bit and treat her to something delicious tonight. With that in mind, I slowly returned. The school Daisy attends is a bit far from here, but I explained the situation to the school and arranged for her to take the bus. This way, carrying her heavy backpack, including her tablet, would be a bit easier. Planning to bill Leon for the bus fare later, I continued my work from home during the day. Daisy doesn't have any extracurricular activities, so she comes home right after school to do her homework.
Bonnie, can you check my homework?
I was surprised. Isn't that what teachers are for? But according to Daisy, it was different.
All my classmates have their moms check. I always did it myself.
Realizing Sherry had always put herself first, I picked up a red pen. After checking her homework, it was time to prepare dinner. When I stood in the kitchen, Daisy followed, saying with her eyes, "I want to help. Today we're making meatloaf, so could you start by peeling the onions?"
Sure.
Daisy was surprisingly quick at peeling onions, and she efficiently followed directions to help cook. I wondered where she learned to cook so well, but there was no time to ask as the meal was ready before I knew it. As these days repeated, we enjoyed our time together, and before we knew it, a month had passed. Looking at the calendar, I anticipated Sherry's call, and sure enough, it came.
Bonnie, thanks for taking care of my daughter this past month. I'll come to pick her up tomorrow.
What are you talking about? I replied calmly. Sherry, who had been traveling for a month, seemed still to be at the airport, as I could hear boarding announcements through the phone.
Wait, what? No, what are you talking about? She's there, right? I left Daisy in your condo's garage.
I haven't seen her. What are you talking about?
Don't play dumb. I sent you a text, so you know.
I haven't received any text. Are you sure you're not mistaken?
You're lying. I know you're lying. Don't play with me.
Sherry, seemingly panicked, screamed over the phone.
What are you going to do about it? I left Daisy with you. You're responsible if anything happens. I'll call Daisy to see what's up.
With a sharp tone, she angrily hung up the phone. After a while, another call came in, and Sherry was yelling again. Sherry tried calling Daisy's child safety phone, but not being able to reach her, she continued to panic.
Sherry, why don't you go home and calm down first? That's true. You're right, I'll go home now.
After that, there was a forgotten hang-up, and voices arguing could be heard, Sherry and presumably a man, but it was too far to make out clearly. The room returned to silence, ominously quiet as if before a storm. When Sherry finally came home, her footsteps thundered down the hall. Entering the living room, her face went from a demonic frenzy to a pale shock. It was because she found all three of us in the living room, Leon, Daisy, and me. Sherry's mouth moved as if to ask why the three of us were together, but no sound came out.
Sherry, I've heard everything from these two. And about that call earlier. What?
I put the phone on speaker so we could all hear. I thought it would make it easier to discuss what comes next. By the way, Daisy's child safety phone was turned off, so it was natural that Sherry couldn't reach her.
How could you do this? That's my line. I said I didn't know earlier, but we've been taking care of Daisy for a month. How could you just leave her at someone's house and go off on a trip suddenly? I sent a text about it. That's not the point.
Leon carefully chose his words and spoke calmly. Let's all calm down. Daisy is here too. Sherry, it's true you left Daisy and went on a trip by yourself. Your attire and luggage look like you've just returned. Sherry was dressed in a warm coat and stylish outdoor clothes. With lots of luggage, perhaps from shopping for souvenirs and clothes, her carry-on looked full. Without denying, Sherry started making excuses.
Yes, I went on a trip. I just wanted a break from being a housewife. The laundry, cooking, it's all the same every day. I was stressed. It's not too much to ask to go out with friends. Is this the friend you're talking about in these emails?
I presented several sheets of paper. They contained email exchanges between Sherry and what appeared to be her affair partner, discussing plans for their trip. Dating back to last spring, and even on the day I took care of Daisy for one day. The supposed day trip with mom friends was a lie. Sherry covered her mouth as if realizing her mistake. Actually, a few hours before Sherry arrived, at Daisy's request, I had looked through Sherry's computer and found these emails in her mailbox. Daisy had noticed her mom frequently texting someone not her dad and suspected the affair. Her suspicion turned to certainty when she saw texts from an unknown man on her mom's phone while she slept. Also, when Sherry was on the phone, she could occasionally hear the other person's voice, but it wasn't her dad's voice. I heard from Daisy 6 months ago that Sherry was having an affair. I had been skeptical until Sherry suddenly announced her trip a month ago, but after checking the computer, I realized Daisy's intuition was right. You could see Leon was visibly shaken.
What have you done? I trusted you, and you leave Daisy with Bonnie to go on a trip for an affair?
Leon confronted Sherry with a trembling fist.
It's a misunderstanding. I was forced to go on that trip by him. Forced? You left your family for a month for that? Come up with a better excuse. I was threatened. Believe me, Daisy, you believe me, right?
Daisy, suddenly addressed, responded calmly and plainly.
Mom, you were so happy on the phone before you left. And you made me do all the cooking and cleaning while you just slept and lazed around.
Daisy glared with her lips pursed.
And you tell me not to stay up late, but you'd go out at night and come back in the morning to sleep on the floor. Everything you said was inconsistent.
Hearing this, Leon pressed further.
Going out at night? You were partying? It's not like that. Daisy, stop talking.
I quickly showed Leon the photo on my mobile phone. It was a photo captured of Sherry, who was dressed up and heading out late at night.
Several months ago, I got a call from Daisy, and since I happened to be nearby, I took this photo, but I was surprised too. Where were you trying to go at that late an hour, Sherry? Oh!
She was confronted with the photo, and perhaps realizing she could no longer make excuses, slumped down right there.
I can't believe it. I can no longer entrust Daisy to you. Let's get divorced. I'll demand alimony. From now on, you're free to be with that other man.
Leon said so with his shoulders drooping and then turned his back on Sherry.
What? A divorce? You're kidding, right? Why? Don't you feel sorry for Daisy not having her mom around? What about you, Daisy? Come on, help Mom out. No, absolutely not. Bonnie feels more like a mom.
I felt very embarrassed as an adult to see Sherry cry to her own child, but Daisy brushed her mom off. While I was taking care of Daisy, I made time for her as much as possible, discussing school, hobbies, future dreams, and various other topics. Of course, cooking together was one of those things.
Sherry, don't worry. I'll make sure Daisy is happy,
I said with a smile, and Sherry hung her head dejectedly, saying nothing more. 6 months later, her divorce from Leon was finalized, and custody went to Leon. Sherry, dragged by her parents, went back to her hometown. The man she had an affair with, whom she met on the internet, disappeared as soon as he found out about the divorce, and communication was cut off. By the time she realized she was just played, it was too late, leaving her with a hefty alimony and child support bill. Her savings were far from enough, and she managed to make the payments by having her parents bear more than half the burden. However, that led to stricter surveillance from her parents, and she could no longer go out late at night. Moreover, the rumor that she got divorced and came back home without her daughter spread throughout the neighborhood, and she was met with cold stares when walking outside during the day, so she rarely left the house. Still, she couldn't remain unemployed forever, so she would have to re-enter society at some point, but what happened after that is unknown to me, Leon, nor Daisy. Leon and Daisy have moved out of their original home to rent it to someone else and are now living on a different floor of the condominium where I live. They plan to use the rental income for loan repayments and savings for Daisy. I've started visiting them almost every day. Leon, who was often away on business trips and couldn't be near Daisy, regretted not being able to pay more attention to his family and focusing too much on work, decided to change jobs. Changing jobs in his 40s was supposed to be a challenge, but his sales performance was excellent, and his communication skills were high, so it was not surprising that he could have held a position of some responsibility. Therefore, his job search did not drag on too long, and 6 months, he received job offers from 2 or 3 companies and starting work at one of them. I was surprised that Leon had such abilities, but what surprised me more was that he preferred outside sales at his previous company and gently declined promotion offers. It wouldn't be interesting to stay on the same company floor all the time.
For that reason? But the new job is fully remote, right? Yes, but talking with various people is interesting in its own way. Most importantly, being with Daisy is the best.
Daisy is still going to school with her light blue backpack. Moving changed her school district, requiring Daisy to transfer schools. Though it must have been sad to say goodbye to her friends and teachers, Daisy seemed surprisingly calm, even enjoying her new school life.
Daisy, have you gotten used to your new school?
I asked while making dinner together, and Daisy smiled.
Yeah, I made a friend in the class next door.
Already? That was fast. Daisy nodded shyly.
Yeah, next time, I'm going to make meatloaf at their house.
That sounds fun.
Yup.
Seeing her smile like a blooming flower made me smile too. Her dream is to open a restaurant. Thinking it's solid for a 10-year-old to have such a dream, Daisy shared her reason.
That friend, like me, doesn't have a mom who cooks, so she cooks herself. She said she wants to cook for people who don't have someone to cook for them, like us. Is that so? I hope I can be like that too. So, I'm practicing making meatloaf.
Her innocent laughter made me feel a complex emotion for a moment, but I quickly smiled back.
That's great, Daisy. Your meatloaf is delicious. I want many people to taste it. Thanks.
Seeing Daisy looking forward with such earnestness made her seem incredibly strong and shining. Her dream will not end in fantasy or delusion. I'm looking forward to the day when Daisy grows up and opens her restaurant.
My name is Emily. I'm a 32-year-old stay-at-home mom. My husband, Benjamin, is 34 and works a regular office job. We have a beautiful little girl, Mia, in our 8 years of marriage. Our 6-year-old daughter is so cute. She has both of us wrapped around her finger. I have an older sister, Lily, who is 3 years my senior. Recently turned 35. She got divorced due to personality clashes and is now a single mom. Her son Logan is just 4 years old, still so young. One day we had planned a trip to the zoo, just the 4 of us. Unfortunately, I caught a cold and had to stay in bed. Benjamin decided to take the day off from work and go to the zoo anyway. He didn't want to disappoint the kids. Even though they were with the children, it was just my husband and sister alone. Even if they're in-laws, who could imagine something would happen between a brother and sister? Fast forward to another day. I was walking down the shopping street on my way home from the grocery store when I saw Benjamin and Lily in a cafe by chance. I was puzzled as to why they were together, but I had to pick up Mia from after-school care soon, so I headed home without giving it much thought. When Benjamin got home that night, he told me nonchalantly, "We ran into each other, and then it started to rain. We just popped into the cafe to take shelter from the rain." So I believed him. However, from that day forward, he started coming home late more often. He started asking for more pocket money because he said it wasn't enough. He also started going out more on his days off. When Lily came over, their relationship seemed more intimate than before. A string of suspicious events. I couldn't believe it, but I still trusted him. Benjamin still adored our daughter as much as ever, and we still had a good relationship. However, it seems that I was the only one who thought everything was fine. Then, an incident happened that made me realize this. One day, as usual, Lily came over to our house. "A friend invited me on a trip. Would you mind taking care of Logan for about a week?" "A whole week? It's the Bahamas, and it would be tough with Logan." But please, I haven't been able to take a break recently. I'll bring back souvenirs, so please? She begged persistently. Indeed, I thought, Lily had a tough time since her divorce. My parents and I had been helping her out, but raising a child alone is undoubtedly hard. So I reluctantly agreed. As the day of Lily's Bahamas trip approached, I'll be out of town for a few days on a business trip, said Benjamin. He said he would be traveling to several regions, so it would take a few days. I thought it would be tough, but when I heard the departure date, I was surprised. It was the same day as Lily's trip to the Bahamas. Was this just a coincidence? Was it just a coincidence that my sister's trip and my husband's business trip were on the same day? Was it a coincidence that Benjamin was spending more time looking at his smartphone? Was it just my imagination that he seemed to be acting sneakily and trying to hide his phone from me? Was it my imagination that when Lily came to the house, they casually touched hands and were standing closer together? Everything started to seem suspicious. Then came the day of Lily's trip. Early in the morning, Lily came over with Logan. The moment I took Logan's hand, I noticed something was off. His hand was abnormally hot. When I picked him up, his body was also hot. I didn't need a thermometer to know he had a high fever. Lily, doesn't Logan have a fever? Yeah, he's had a fever since yesterday. It hasn't gone down yet. We can't delay. We have to get him to a hospital quickly. Of course, my son Logan's health comes before a trip. But then my sister said something outrageous. Then I'll leave it up to you. What? That's what I'm saying. I'm leaving Logan to you. You can't possibly be leaving behind a child with a fever, can you? I have no choice. We've had this trip planned for a while. It's ridiculous to pay a cancellation fee. This isn't about... It's not about the money, right? Isn't Logan's well-being important? Of course, he's important, but since you're here, Emily, I'm not worried. Please take good care of him. Wait, don't go, sis! Despite my pleas, she left. I couldn't believe it. Logan was suffering with a high fever, and yet his condition worsened from the stress of moving around, so I quickly tucked him into bed and placed a cold, damp towel on his forehead. While preparing an ice pillow in the freezer, my husband woke up. Honey, it seems like Logan has a fever. Really? My sister's awful. She left Logan like this to go on a trip. It can't be helped. They've had this trip planned for a long time, and it's too late to cancel now. You too? Dear, poor Logan. If you're so concerned, then you should take care of him. Honey, can you do something about your business trip? If Logan has a contagious disease, he might pass it on to Mia. I'll take care of Logan, and I need you to take care of Mia. I thought my husband, who adores our daughter, would reluctantly agree. His job is important, but surely our daughter is even more so. But my hope was dashed. What? That's impossible. If you're worried, why not leave her with your parents? That won't work. Our parents are busy with their jobs, and your parents live too far away to drop her off at this hour. Then it can't be helped. Logan will be fine if we let him rest. Don't worry. Please don't be so casual about this. What do you want me to do? I can't change my plans. Oh, it's time. I have to go now. Bye. With that, he hurriedly left. Left alone, I immediately called my parents. They couldn't take time off from their sudden work commitments. But they agreed to leave work early and pick up Mia as soon as possible. I felt relieved when my mom said that. Until my mom arrives, I'll have to keep Mia locked in her room. I feel sorry for her, but it can't be helped. Meanwhile, Logan's condition seemed to be worsening. He started coughing, in addition to the fever. In the afternoon, my mom, who left work early, arrived. I handed Mia over to her and headed straight to the pediatric clinic with Logan. In the car, the motion seemed to make Logan uncomfortable, which was hard to see. The doctor said it was just a common cold and prescribed a fever reducer. He asked us to observe Logan and call an ambulance if his fever went up, or if he seemed delirious. I'm sorry, Mom. for someone leaving Mia with you. Don't worry about it. More importantly, I'm concerned about Logan. To my parents, Logan is as precious as Mia. On the other end of the line, I could hear my mother's worried voice. After hanging up with my mom, I decided to call my husband's office. I wanted to find out where he was staying on his business trip, just in case. The reply I received was, I should be on paid vacation. I sighed, lifting my voice towards the heavens as if making a plea. A dreaded suspicion was beginning to solidify. I opened my husband's laptop. I had never looked through it before, but a quick scan of his search history revealed his destination: the Bahamas. Both flight tickets and hotel bookings were arranged by him. I recognized the hotel's name. It was the same place my sister had mentioned. My sister and husband in the Bahamas at the same time, staying in the same hotel. Such a coincidence seemed next to impossible. The mere fact that my husband was in the Bahamas, taking paid leave while claiming to be on a business trip, was an alarming situation. Curious, I looked at my smartphone. I was checking my sister's social media posts. There were no new posts, but looking at her recent posts, although not clearly visible, I could tell she was frequently with someone. The glimpses of clothing I could catch were all too familiar. What changed my suspicion into certainty was a photo where the wristwatch of the man she was with was visible. It was the watch I had given my husband. Although not expensive, it was from a minor manufacturer, hence the unique design. The odds that another man dressed like my husband wearing the same watch would appear in. My sister's photo seemed infinitesimally small, and then I found the conclusive piece of evidence. A photo, titled "Window Shopping," had my sister's reflection on the glass. On the edge of that photo, also reflected on the glass, was another person. Undeniably, it was my husband. My blissfully ignorant sister must have posted the picture without noticing her husband's reflection in the glass. My hands trembling, I saved all the pictures. There was no mistake about it. My sister and husband were having an affair. Right now, they were together. I felt everything I had built up with my husband crumbling down all at once. I tried calling them numerous times, but soon a voicemail message started playing. It seemed they had turned off their phones. Logan's fever still hadn't broken. Seeing his distressed face, anger started to rise within me. Despite our young child's suffering, despite me being in such a difficult situation, right now, my sister and husband were probably laughing, enjoying their vacation in the Bahamas. Could there be a worse story? I was trembling with anger. I wondered what to do. But that could wait. First, I needed Logan to recover. But Logan's fever showed no signs of abating. In fact, it seemed to be increasing. I was shocked when I took his temperature. 42 degrees Fahrenheit? Children tend to run high fevers. Mia had experienced a 40-degree Fahrenheit fever before, but never this high. Why isn't the fever reducer working? Logan was completely drained. It looked painful for him to even move. What should I do? I fought hard to suppress the panic that was threatening to overtake me. I need to call an ambulance. It was at that moment, with my smartphone clutched in my hand. "Mama," Logan murmured in a small voice. His face contorted in pain. He called for his aunt. Unforgivable. I will never forgive them. As my vision seemed to turn red with anger, Logan's condition took a sudden turn for the worse. A week had passed since then. Contrary to my feelings of sorrow, today was a clear day. Staring blankly at the vast blue sky, tears began to spill over. I had lost count of how many times I had cried. Yet, the tears wouldn't stop. I could feel Mia's hands trembling in my own. The daughter was crying too. As I lifted her up, I could see my parents weeping uncontrollably over her trembling small shoulders, and the others in attendance. Everyone, absolutely everyone, was in tears. Suddenly, my smartphone vibrated. I put Mia down and saw my sister's name on the screen. "Hello?" "Ah, Emily, long time no see. I just got back from the Bahamas. I've just landed at the airport. I'm off to pick up Logan. Thanks for looking after him." It felt like a phone call from another world. I muttered to myself, "He's gone to heaven." A tear that should have stopped fell. What? My sister on the other end of the phone didn't seem to understand what I had said. She responded with a clueless question. Huh? Heaven? What are you talking about? I don't understand. That's what I'm saying. You went to heaven while you were on your trip to the Bahamas. Huh? I don't understand what you're saying. You'll understand when you get here. The funeral was over, and we're at the crematorium. Huh? Crematorium? When I told my confused sister the location of the crematorium, she abruptly hung up the phone. Logan! Logan! My sister, just out of the taxi, dramatically changed her expression and started running. She called his name and looked around, but Logan was nowhere to be found. Where is he? He's not here. Of course he's not. What do you mean? I slowly pointed in one direction, towards the crematorium. The crematorium doesn't emit smoke like it used to, but it's true that he is being cremated right now. Logan, that day, the day you dropped off Logan, his fever shot up to 42 degrees Fahrenheit all at once. 42 degrees Fahrenheit? The antipyretic we got from the pediatrician had no effect, and his condition worsened rapidly. We had to call an ambulance in a panic. So, that means Logan is... I don't want to answer that. We're in the middle of a funeral. Saying that, I spread my arms wide, pointing at the crematorium. Hey, what does this mean? What happened to Logan? Why are you here? Someone shouted in place of my speechless sister. It was my husband. Unbelievable. My husband had come here with my sister. What does that matter right now? What about Logan? Of course it matters. Not losing to my husband's voice, I shouted back. How can you two just abandon your family and go on a secret love trip? Moreover, Logan had a fever, and even when I said I needed help, you ignored me and went on your trip. Are you out of your mind? Well, what are you talking about? I already know when I asked your company, they said you had taken paid leave. I checked your computer and found a booking for a trip to the Bahamas. You were on the same flight and stayed at the same hotel as my sister. You think you can just claim it's coincidence? That's... I must have had a terrifying look on my face. My husband lost his words under my intimidating stare. Tell me, Emily, did Logan, did he die? Do you have the luxury to ask such a question now? What do you think we're doing here? Why do you think I'm in a simple, modest dress, standing at a crematorium? Don't you get it? No, no! My sister's scream dominated the scene. As my sister broke down crying, I looked down at her with cold eyes. You have no right to cry. You abandoned your son to go on a secret trip with my husband. You're the worst kind of person. I was lonely. I was so lonely all by myself, so I just what? Reached out to your sister's husband? What do you mean? I've done nothing wrong. It's not my fault. The real villain here is my ex-husband who refused to take our son. And it's not just him, it's also the fault of our parents too, who never helped me with the child. And Emily too. My sister reached angrily, not taking responsibility. I didn't choose to have a child, and I didn't choose to be a single mother. I wanted him to take our son if we were going to get divorced, but he refused. I've been struggling alone because of that. But I couldn't. Logan, oh Logan. Lily, it was her lover, my husband, who comforted her as she collapsed into tears. It seemed they were no longer interested in hiding their affair. Don't blame everyone else for your problems. Our parents and I have helped as much as we could. You can't justify leaving a sick child to go on a tryst, not realizing how rotten you are. You're the worst. Hey, Emily, isn't that a bit harsh? Lily just lost Logan. She's in shock. Shut up, accomplice. I'm divorcing you, so be ready to pay what you owe. What? What does that have to do with anything? It has everything to do with it. My husband and I argued while my sister cried. It was a chaotic situation. Our parents approached. My tear-streaked sister started blaming them. Dad, Mom, Logan is... Why didn't you take care of Logan properly? Why did you let Logan... Suddenly, there was a loud slap. Enough with your nonsense. It was my father who slapped my sister's face. Don't blame others when you were the one who abandoned your child. But... And having an affair with your sister's husband? You shameless woman. I'm ashamed to have raised you like this. My sister cried even louder at her father's words. I wanted to punch my husband too. I was glaring at him when... Mommy? I heard a little boy's voice. My sister quickly turned around. There... What? Logan? A man was holding Logan. Logan! Logan! My sister ran towards them, but the man quickly moved Logan out of her reach. Hey, what are you doing? Andrew! The man holding Logan was Andrew, my sister's ex-husband. He was the one who divorced my sister due to irreconcilable differences. What are you doing leaving Logan like that? He's my son, not yours. He's my son too. I complied with the public opinion that it's better for a mother to have custody, even though you insisted on not giving me parental rights. But you wouldn't let me see him no matter how many times I asked, and my worry proved justified. You're not fit to be Logan's mother. Just shut up. You should just pay the child support. I pay any amount for Logan, but you left him without care. You don't even know how critical his condition was, and you're out on your affair trip. That day, when Logan's condition deteriorated, I panicked and called an ambulance. When we got to the hospital and while he was being treated, I called our parents and Andrew, Logan's father. He was surprised when I told him my sister was on a trip with my husband. After that, Logan, who was discharged from the hospital in good health, was resting at Andrew's and his parents' house. Wait a minute. You're saying Logan's okay? Then who's... My husband asked, puzzled, staring at the crematorium. I replied, It's our grandmother. Our grandmother, mother to me and my sister, and great-grandmother to me and Logan, was in her advanced years and bedridden, living in a nursing facility. She passed away from old age just recently. Despite being bedridden, our grandma was quite lucid and doted on her great-grandchildren, me and Logan. Whenever we visited her at the nursing home, she would light up with joy. Her sudden departure left us, my parents and Mia, in a deep sorrow, unable to do anything but grieve. Logan, who had been ill, couldn't attend the funeral. However, since he'd called my sister to the crematorium, Andrew was there. His fever had subsided and he looked well. You tricked us! No one said Logan had died. My sister accused us with her eyes, but it was we who had the right to accuse. I didn't hear about Grandma's death either, she snapped back. I tried calling both of you several times to tell you about Grandma's passing, but the line was always busy. Considering how kind she was to you, it's unfathomable that you're this late. Enough! You're all making fools of us. Logan, let's go home. You don't want to stay with such a man. You want to be with Mom, right? Andrew, give Logan back right now. Will you ever stop? The one who scolded my sister, who was bearing down on Andrew, was our father. Do you still think you can keep Logan with you after all of this? What you've done could have gotten you in legal trouble for child abandonment. You've proven to be an unfit mother. Never think you'll be allowed near Logan again. Logan will be raised by Andrew. Dad, how could you? We've decided to fully support Andrew and hire a lawyer. You are no longer our daughter. We're cutting ties with you. Mom! My sister's face went pale at the harsh words of her own parents. I stood in front of her with a firm stance. I'm divorcing my husband, so why don't the two of you stick together? You should be fine not seeing your children anymore. You were able to go on an overseas trip and leave them behind after all. Upon hearing this, my husband burst out. Emily, wait! It was just a lapse in judgment. Lily and I were just fooling around. The ones who matter to me are you and Mia." Then my sister also started shouting, "What do you mean fooling around? You told me you no longer loved Emily, and that I was the only one you loved." Stop the noise. I just love my daughter. Don't mess with me." And so the storm had reignited between my husband and my sister. Leaving the squabbling pair behind, we departed from the scene with my grandmother's ashes. After that, we had a lot of disagreements, but have appointed a lawyer. I managed to settle everything. Logan went to live with his dad. I thought he might feel sad being away from his mother, but he was rather pleased. Which meant my sister wasn't functioning at all as a mother. My husband and I had our disputes. Well, more accurately, my husband was obstinate, but after being scolded by both my parents and his, he was feeling down. Then our daughter landed the knockout punch. "I don't need daddy." She might be only 6 years old, but girls mature quickly. She must have understood her father's despicable actions in her own way. When our daughter looked at my husband like he was a bug, I couldn't help but laugh. For my husband, who adored his daughter, no, my ex-husband, there could be no greater punishment. He was allowed to see his daughter, but whether she wanted to see him was up to her. And so, the storm came to an end. Mia and I returned to my parents' home and are living peacefully. My parents are thrilled to live with Mia. She's starting elementary school next year, so we're excited about the preparations. I plan to find a job when she starts school. Logan comes by every now and then with Andrew. He looks totally different. His face is brighter, and he's always smiling. Meanwhile, my sister and my ex-husband seem to have ended their relationship quite easily. I guess it was really just a fling for my ex-husband. Perhaps upset about being disliked by his daughter, he dumped my sister without hesitation. However, his despicable affair with his wife's sister became known at his company, which questions his character, and he was relocated to a remote area. That will make it even more difficult for him to see his daughter. Serves him right. As for my sister, after being abandoned by everyone, she seemed to live like an empty shell for a while. Then she disappeared. We filed a missing persons report, but I have a feeling we'll never find my sister. That's just the feeling I get.
Do you think there's a company that would hire a poor single mother's child like you? My goal was to work at the same bank where my father worked, and during the final interview, someone known as the demon instructor said that to me. It was clear this person looked down on me for being from a single mother household and had no intention of accepting me for the position. I desperately dealt with it, but the interview kept getting worse and worse. Finally reaching my limit, I took out my phone from my bag and called my father. That's because my father is actually the bank's... My name is Emma Miller. I'm a 23-year-old college senior looking for a job. My parents got divorced last year, so my mom is now a single mother. They both wanted to live their own lives. Naturally, I stayed with my mom, but my future plans were influenced by my father. My father is the president of the bank, the chief executive officer. This bank is the largest in the country, and I aspired to be a bank employee because I admired my father for working there. And tomorrow I have my final interview. Honestly, I'm not very good at studying, and when I said my goal was to work at the bank, my teachers and peers not only tried to stop me, but also ridiculed me. I thought it would all end after the interview, but looking back, it was really awful. One day, during my college life, "Hey Emma, have you decided where you're going to go after graduation?" Her name was Julia. She's a friend I met in college. For me, it's just the one choice, the bank. I answered her question without hesitation. Then, the people around us who had been listening to our conversation started to murmur. Did I say something strange? Just as I thought that, Julia spoke up first. "You know, Emma, it's hard to say, but I think you should know your place." Huh? To my surprise, someone I thought was my friend was insulting me. As I tried to argue back in frustration, another guy approached me and said, "It's impossible for you. That place is the largest bank in the country, you know. It's the most difficult to get into from this university, with only one person getting a job from there in the past 10 years. I know that. Of course, I haven't told anyone around me that my father is the head of the bank I'm applying to. If I did, people would likely say I got through the back door, considering my abilities. If that happened, I'd be causing trouble for my father, and it would be painful to feel like my skills aren't good enough. I didn't like being talked about, especially when it wasn't true. Emma, I'm saying this for your own good. Well, I don't need your advice. As I looked around, everyone's eyes were on me. Their cold stares pierced my heart. Why do I have to hear this? As I thought that, the teacher, who had noticed the commotion, came over. What's going on here? The boy from earlier answered. Miller says she wants to work at North Trust Bank. At that, the teacher's face also tensed up. And then she said something unthinkable. Are you taking society for granted? Even the teacher, who was supposed to be on the student's side, denied my dream. There was no one there to stand up for me. Well, if I want to go there, what's wrong with that? Of course I objected, but the teacher piled on more. You're naive. My father is an interviewer for North Trust Bank. They say he's a demon interviewer. The teacher's surname was Anderson, a 29-year-old woman. So if I encountered an interviewer with the same surname Anderson, it would likely be her father. A demon interviewer, you say? Yes, that's right. My father doesn't like new talent. He says it's good enough if he interviews 100 people and hires 2. Was it the Sun Plaza branch? And you're from a single mother household, right? I wondered why she would ask that, but I honestly answered yes. Then the teacher showed a sinister smile. At that time, I had no way of knowing the reason for her smile. The argument ended with the bell signaling the start of class. But from that moment on, the way people looked at me grew colder. My friends, starting with Julia, whom I thought was my friend, and my classmates who attended classes with me, distanced themselves from me. It was as if they didn't want to associate with a fool. Their reactions became worse with each exam I passed. The North Trust Bank exam process had 4 stages. The first stage was a written test. The second and third stages were interviews by people from the head office. In the fourth and final stage, interviews were conducted by the person in charge of hiring for the desired work area and the head office hiring manager. In other words, it was an interview with the highest-ranking hiring manager. By the way, I wanted to work at the bank at the Sun Plaza, and I had managed to pass the third stage. Why, how did you pass the third stage? Even those who had looked down on me were now surprised and anxious about my progress. That's because most of them had failed their desired company's second stage interviews. It had been 3 months since the job hunting season began. In my class alone, there were no confirmed hires. The atmosphere was filled with panic, envy, and jealousy. Perhaps I could be the first one to get a job offer. Those who had been so arrogant now ostracized me even more due to their pride. However, I got used to that life at university and decided to focus only on myself. My motivation was solely to get an offer from North Trust Bank. My mind was only on that. But then, one day, Teacher Anderson started attacking me in front of everyone after class. All right, everyone, listen up! The teacher shouted to everyone who was preparing to leave. At her voice, everyone turned around and stopped what they were doing. I also paid attention, wondering what was going on. And then the teacher started talking. This time, Emma Miller has cleared the 3rd round of North Trust Bank's exams. The atmosphere around us suddenly became heavy. However, with the next statement, everyone around me seemed to catch their breath. But it seems she'll fail the 4th round. Huh? What do you mean? I muttered involuntarily. Seeing my reaction, the teacher twisted her face into a sneer. The reason is the interviewer for the 4th round has been decided to be my father, the demon instructor, Anderson. Oh! The surroundings erupted in surprise and cheers. Serves you right. Know your place. Good. The classroom was filled with voices condemning me in unison. I couldn't believe it. Everyone I thought were my friends turned their back on me during this job hunting process, even though I had done nothing wrong. Despite that, those around me harassed me and hurled abusive language at me. At first, I thought it might be a way to relieve stress. The stress from job hunting is immeasurable, so I wanted to think that they were just harassing me to relieve that stress. But it was different. I realized the situation around me. This was jealousy. They were envious of me, challenging something they themselves wouldn't dare to. There's no way I could lose to someone like her, who isn't even good at studying. There's no way someone like her could get into North Trust Bank. If she can make it, then so can I. If Miller is going, I should have tried as well. But that place is difficult. It's the most challenging. It's impossible. So why is Miller trying without hesitation? It's wrong. She's trying for a place that even I can't get into. I can't forgive that. It's strange. The reality that becomes apparent as job hunting progresses. Among those who pass, those who fail, and various others, no one here has much hope. I was being attacked because of jealousy. The final straw was the teacher's words and actions, as her father was in charge of hiring at North Trust Bank. If the teacher led the attack on me, the students overflowing with jealousy would just follow her. On that day, I finally couldn't take it anymore and stormed out of the room. When I returned home, my mother encouraged me gently. Wrapped in such warmth, I cried. I took a break from university for a while, and before I knew it, the day of the final interview had come. Don't forget, just do your best. I left the house after receiving words of encouragement from my mother. Upon arriving at the interview venue, I was guided to the waiting room. At first, there were nearly 300 applicants in the Sun Plaza area, but now only about 10 remained. Only 3 would survive from this group. My name was called just as I was about to close my eyes to concentrate. Please come in. Hello, thank you. My final interview began. There were 3 people in the room. One was Anderson, the teacher's father, just as the teacher had said. The second was a man who appeared to be the chief hiring officer. He looked about 10 years younger than my father. A man in his 30s, presumably in charge of keeping records, faced a computer at a slight distance. The interview began with questions from Anderson. Starting with the typical self-introduction, I was asked about my motivation for applying. I answered these questions without difficulty. I don't really like female bank employees. The complaints started suddenly. Not knowing what to say in response, I fell silent. Anderson continued, because, they have quiet voices, are physically weak, and many think they can please people just by serving tea. I realized this man must be the type to mistreat his subordinates, and this would be a stressful interview from here on. Silence is taboo in an interview, so I racked my brain and tackled the situation. I was in a sports club, and I think I'm strong. I'll do my best with any job given to me, just like a man. I tried to appeal and respond flexibly to his complaints. However, he didn't find it amusing. Tch, and clicked his tongue, directing his gaze toward the papers in his hand. I felt something was off at this point. This interview was clearly going too far. Yet the chief hiring officer, who should be higher ranking than Anderson, said nothing. Upon closer observation, the chief hiring officer looked younger than Anderson. Maybe Anderson is pressuring this person too. That's what I thought. However, there was nothing I could do about it. I could only sit quietly and endure the interview. After a brief silence, Anderson spoke again. It seemed he would be in charge of the entire interview. You seem to come from a single-mother household, am I wrong? He was probably looking at the documents I submitted from university. They included my address and family composition. Yes, my parents divorced, and now I live with my mother. As soon as he heard my words, Anderson began to laugh. His sinister smile echoed through the room. I see. You're from a single mother household. What business does a poor person have here? As soon as he heard my response, he blatantly changed his attitude. As the teacher's sinister smile crossed my mind, I became sweaty. I struggled to find the correct response and began to feel anxious. But it was Anderson who started talking first. Do you think there's a company that would hire someone from a poor single-parent family like you? He said that while mocking me. Huh? Just because I'm from a single-parent family, I won't be hired? You're going to assume I'm poor? I couldn't help but raise my tone. Of course, Anderson reacted to that. It was as if he had been waiting for me to fight back. Should I take your attitude as defiance toward me, your interviewer? Ugh. I was frustrated, but I couldn't say anything back. The bank my father worked at, which I had always admired. I don't want to lose because of this one man, but I don't know what to say in return. Why don't you say something? Anderson further pressured me. The moment I heard those words, something inside me snapped. My consciousness fell swiftly. I became incredibly calm to the point where I couldn't believe it myself. Understood. Anderson seemed puzzled by my response. While staring at him, I stood up from the hard metal chair. Hey, what's with you suddenly standing up? Finally, another person spoke, having been sitting the whole time. You've finally gone mad, huh? What do you plan to do? I know about you because I've heard from my daughter. It seemed that the teacher and Anderson had shared information. Is this not a leak of information? Well, that doesn't matter now. I took my phone out of my bag and suddenly started making a call. What are you doing, making a phone call? Are you making a mockery of this interview? Stop it now or I'll reject you right here. Anderson threatened me, but I wasn't fazed at all. Then I spoke into the phone. Hello, Dad? Your father? What can a person from a single-parent family do clinging to their separated father? Was that the laugh from the hiring manager? Yes, that's right. A guy named Anderson. Hey, Dad, can you come to the interview room now? Of course. I just finished visiting a nearby branch, so I'll be there in 10 minutes. Wait for me there. Okay. And so, I hung up the phone. The person in charge of recording was staring at me with wide eyes, surprised by the unusual scene. And of course, the one who reacted the most was Anderson. Pointing at me, he said, You're finished. Making a phone call during an interview? Unprecedented. There's no way you'll pass. Go home and go to bed or something. I finally decided to argue back against him. I couldn't take it anymore. This isn't even an interview. It's you who's finished, Mr. Anderson. The chief hiring officer and the recorder were astonished by my sudden confrontation with the interviewer. Judging by their expressions, no one had been able to stand up to this man's abusive behavior until now. As evidence, the recorder's eyes were shining. Were they expecting Anderson to be punished? You! Anderson slammed his right hand on the table with all his might. A loud thud echoed throughout the room. The men were surprised, but I didn't flinch. And then I spoke to Anderson. Brian Wilson, you know him, right? For a moment, Anderson had a look on his face as if I had hit a nerve with my question. He immediately countered. Are you mocking me? There's no way anyone wouldn't know the president of this bank. To Anderson, who was confidently showing off his composure, I added some more words. So, if my last name was Wilson until recently, would you think it's a coincidence? Time seemed to stop for the three of them. The chief hiring officer and the recorder stared at me with wide eyes. Anderson then stood up from his chair and muttered, What did you say? His face showed a somewhat uneasy expression. Emma Wilson. That was my full name until recently. My father is Brian Wilson. Yes, the president of the bank, 63-year-old Brian Wilson. What? You've got to be kidding. This can't be happening. Anderson let out a strange scream. This was no longer an interview, but at that moment, my father entered the room as the door opened. He then said words that echoed my own feelings. This is hardly an interview at all. Mr. Wilson, thank you for your hard work. The two men stood up and greeted my father as soon as they saw him enter. I looked at my father and felt that his presence was extraordinary. The president... Anderson's face turned pale as he muttered. His mouth remained opened. My father then spoke to him. "Hey, Anderson, what were you doing to my daughter, huh?" My father was a big man who had practiced judo. And now, with his shaved head and a scar on his forehead, he looked intimidating. His deep, resonant voice was one that everyone found frightening. Even the confident Anderson, the moment he heard my father's voice, "Yes, sir," squeaked out. "I don't want to hear your answer." And Green. It seemed that Green was the chief hiring officer. This was my first time learning his name because the nameplate was bent and I couldn't see it. "Yes, sir. Aren't you the chief hiring officer? Have you let this tyrant run wild until now?" "I'm very sorry." The man called Green bent at a 90-degree angle and bowed. The young clerk looked scared at the sight. Even he, who had done nothing wrong, was drenched in sweat. "Hey, clerk, what's your name?" My father suddenly called out in a gentle voice. The change in his voice only made it more terrifying. "My name is Harris." "Mr. Harris, can you send today's interview record to my PC? Of course, you're also recording the audio, right?" I later heard that this bank's interviews were not only transcribed, but also recorded as backup. Thanks to that, Anderson's misconduct was exposed to my father and he was punished. Looking at Anderson, he was trembling. He was like a frog stared down by a snake. "Hey, Anderson." "Yes? What is it?" The frightened Anderson couldn't even speak clearly. He was a completely different person from earlier. "Apologize to my daughter. It's not because she's my daughter, okay? You've trampled on the feelings of young people who want to join this bank." At my father's words, Anderson bowed deeply and apologized. Sorry, but I couldn't forgive him even after seeing that. Dad, I can't forgive him." When I murmured that weakly, "Of course," my father said, walking up to Anderson. It looked like a lion about to hunt a small animal. "Anderson, do you know what will happen to you if you do something like this?" My father pressured him. Anderson was frozen. "You didn't just do this to my daughter, right? We'll see later in the records. But how many victims have you had besides her?" No one could intervene in this interrogation-like scene. Even I, his daughter, could barely watch in silence, feeling disgusted. Anderson began to speak to my father, sweat pouring down his face. At least over 100 people. I was shocked to hear that. He had done the same thing to more than 100 people. Furthermore, the fact that he was left unchecked made me doubt the hiring practices of this company. I felt distrustful even though it was my father's company. "Hey, Green." "Yes?" "I'm busy with overseas projects, so I trusted you and left the hiring to you. Well, this is my mistake in choosing people. It's my fault that it ended up like this." "That is..." "So I'll take responsibility and reform personnel so there won't be any more victims like this. You two should be prepared for punishment, okay? And Anderson, I'll never forgive you." He gasped, frightened. "I plan to gather all the victims and create a victims group. I'll bravely make it public in the media. I'm prepared to face any consequences, so you should be prepared too, right?" Hearing this, Anderson collapsed on the spot as if he had lost his sanity. My father moved away from him and opened a window. Oxygen returned to the tense room. Everyone had seemingly forgotten to breathe. And so, my job interview ended. By the way, I passed. It wasn't due to my father's favoritism. It was apparently the result of a discussion among hiring managers from all areas, based on the recorded audio. As a result, the hiring decisions of those who were rejected by Anderson were also reconsidered. The news broke the next day, and my father bowed in front of the media. Many people were impressed by his attitude, and he continued as the bank president. On the other hand, Green, who had been the chief hiring officer, voluntarily resigned. And Anderson was sued by the company and the victims group. Anderson, whose past tyranny was gradually exposed, was arrested for defamation. Meanwhile, at the university, "Oh, Miss Miller, congratulations on your job offer." The teacher, with a forced smile, congratulated me in front of everyone. At that moment, my father and the principal appeared in the classroom. And then, "Miss Anderson, this is Brian Wilson, the president of North Trust Bank." "Oh, yes, I've seen him on TV, so I know who he is." "And he is Emma Miller's father." "What? What did you say?" I added to the surprised teacher's words. "He's my mother's ex-husband and my father." My words caused a stir in the class. "Is that so?" Humans have a tendency to flatter those with power. When they realized I was the daughter of the bank's top executive, everyone in the classroom became agitated. It was as if they had wished they had been friendlier to me. "Miss Miller's father is the president of North Trust Bank." The teacher, upon learning the truth, became an empty shell. The principal then said to the teacher, "This school is able to operate thanks to the support of Mr. Wilson's bank. But it seems you've been bad-mouthing Mr. Wilson's daughter along with the rest of the class, haven't you?" "Well, that is—" "Never mind the excuses. Tell me only the truth. Is it a fact?" Pressed by the dean, the teacher finally hung her head and admitted, "Yes. Mr. Wilson wants to discontinue support for this school. If those who harassed Miss Miller voluntarily leave the school, he says the support will continue." "What? Leave the school?" "If you decide to stay, we intend to charge you the entire amount of the discontinued support. Naturally, I don't think you can afford it. So what will you do?" The choice was clear to me as I listened. The teacher seemed to understand as well, and ultimately resigned from the school effective immediately. As they left, they apologized to me, but their voices were so quiet that I couldn't make it out. In the end, more than half of the classmates who had attacked me together withdrew voluntarily from the school. When my father said, "Those who don't come forward before my daughter names the culprits will be considered for legal action," one by one they confessed. Given the power on display, it was a natural outcome. Ultimately, those people escaped legal action, but their enrollment in the university was not recognized. With my father's help, I secured a job offer, and my path after graduation was set. All that's left is to do my best for the remainder of my college life. My life is just beginning. I've vowed in my heart to do my best to someday become an exemplary banker like my father.